Chapter 696. No one liked things that were too far away and unknown. That meant they were hard to grasp. So most people would always choose the benefits in front of them. In the night, many voices sounded around the Xia family compound and then returned to silence. The lotuses in the lake had all withered, and not like autumn and winter. All the stems, leaves, and flowers seemed to have become black sculptures, causing the entire lake to have an eerie atmosphere. While the battle between Qi Siren, Wen Guanyue, Miss Shang and the old servant had been short, it involved the holy item of the dynasty. The battle between the four grandmasters had been dangerous. At this time, Qi Siren, Miss Shang and the old servant had disappeared. But Wen Guanyue did not leave. He just faced the black lake and waited silently. You came a bit late. He waited until the clear sound of footsteps appeared not far behind him before he slowly turned around and said indifferently. Ding Ning was standing not far behind him on the lakeside path. He looked at Wen Guanyue. Before he spoke, Wen Guanyue continued, I know that a battle like this cannot be hidden from the outside, but you are too arrogant. Or rather, like in the past, you trusted the wrong person. The scent of the bone prison mountain, it is Qi Siren. A voice sounded behind Ding Ning. Qian Mu's thin body stood in Ding Ning's shadow. Adding on the black robes he wore, it was hard for people in the distance to see him. His voice quickly became angry. Soul-suppressing nail. This is the holy item of the Qi Emperor used to intimidate the sects, something from the Qi ancestral temple. Ding Ning nodded. His expression could not be seen in the darkness, but his voice was still calm. He looked at Wen Guanyue and asked, when did trust become a bad thing? If there was no trust in this world, what would happen and I trusted you out of respect? How could I have thought that someone like you, who scolded me so righteously, was not worthy of being called a person? Not everyone is so noble. We only have one life, and do not want to waste it on the unpredictable future. No matter what you say about me, at least my master didn't live to see the future you described. When Guanyue was not angry. His voice was very calm. Even his posture did not change. You were once the strongest grandmaster in the world, so you can decide the life and death of many people, but we cannot. If I were you, perhaps I would have made a different choice. You reminded me again that I have to be more careful in the future, and I will make changes. Ding Ning nodded. He looked at Wen Guanyue and said, You had time to escape, but you stopped here to wait for me. You want to represent someone to negotiate with me? Wen Guanyue's body inexplicably felt cold. He frowned slightly and nodded silently. I understand. Ding Ning said faintly, then turned and left. When Guanyue looked in disbelief at Ding Ning's back. He hadn't expected Ding Ning to react like this. He didn't even listen to any conditions and just left with a faint I understand. Miss Shang's life is not something you can decide. You have to be careful of yourself. At this time, Ding Ning's voice sounded in the wind by the lake. Your masters want the world to know that I have betrayed them. I have come to see you. If you accidentally die, maybe many people will say that I have one face in front of everyone in the day, but another in the dark, and the blame will fall on me. Hearing the voice in the summer wind, when Guanyue's body grew colder, he suddenly felt terror, because he thought that what Ding Ning said was not impossible. After dawn, I do not want to hear any other opinions from the Xia family. Before sitting in the carriage, Ding Ning said this to the members of the Xia family. What do you plan to do? Qian Mu sat down next to him, looked at him and asked seriously. He did not belong to the Bazin Kendo ground, and was not even from the Qin. The Qi Emperor's actions had made him disappointed and hateful. He did not want Ding Ning to make a choice that would disappoint him. Of course I cannot ignore Miss Shang's life. Ding Ning did not avoid his gaze and said softly and seriously, If you are willing, I want you to bring something to Yuanwu. Qian Mu stilled. You want me to bring something to Yuanwu? Or strictly speaking, half of it? Ding Ning slowly nodded and then reached out with his right hand. As he reached out, the sound of silkworms sounded in the carriage. A pale white stream of energy flowed out from his fingertips, slowly forming a small ball. In the center of the little ball there was an unusual light. As his gaze flashed, many irregular bumps appeared on the surface of the pale white ball, and some of the unusual light came out. In the next moment, when he sensed something, Qian Mu's body started to tremble. This was an instinctive tremble. Qian Mu's body was very different from ordinary cultivators, but even he had a feeling that his energy and body would be swallowed by the energy wrapped in the pale white ball. When he had first met Ding Ning, he had sensed a terrifying presence in Ding Ning's body. Back then, Ding Ning had told him that this was the elixir of life from the Wuji ancestral mountain. Now, this scent was very familiar, but without the restraint of the 9-death silkworm, this presence was more than 100 times stronger. He looked at Ding Ning and his breathing sped up. His thoughts were in chaos. While he knew what this was, he did not understand what Ding Ning wanted to do. Actually, one rumor is true. Yuan Wu has always wanted to live forever. The elixir of life is something he has always dreamed of. Ding Ning looked calmly at the paling Qian Mu and slowly said, "If he wants it, I will give it to him. You want to use this to exchange for Miss Shang?" Qian Mu found it difficult to breathe. He did not dare to believe it. "I understand him," Ding Ning slowly nodded. "People like him will find it hard to resist this kind of temptation. Even if he does not have the courage to use it, he will want to obtain it." Qian Mu was stunned. But he could not say it clearly, but instinctively, he felt that even so, this elixir of life was still a very shocking and useful thing. Also, if it landed in Yuan Wu's hands, who knew what would happen? Using Miss Shang to negotiate with me is related to Jing Xiu and Yuan Wu's interests. But I will only negotiate with Yuan Wu. Ding Ning glanced at him and said, "I want to see what kind of change this will bring between the two of them." Chapter 697. In the dark night, the carriage did not drive out of the Xia family, but arrived in front of the most elegant buildings in the Xia family compound. The other people were already here. Ding Ning described what had happened just now, including what he had said to Qian Mu. Then he said, "When Guanyue did not stay here because he knew the future and waited for Miss Shang, but because Yuan Wu and Jing Xiu had made arrangements long ago. The Nanquan families and consort Zhao are not on good terms. It is normal for Yuan Wu and Jing Xiu to set up a trap here. But because of Wen Guanyue's identity, I was careless and did not think in that direction. All things are changing. Nothing is eternal. According to what you said before, the elixir of life in the Wuji ancestral mountain may erase a person's original intelligence and is very dangerous. But in Yuan Wu's hands, I do not know what the result will be." Yantai Guanjian looked gravely at Ding Ning. "If you want to remove all our doubts, we must know where your confidence comes from." "My confidence comes from my cultivation." Ding Ning looked at Yantai Guanjian and said, "Regardless of how Jing Xiu and Yuan Wu improve, I have the Great Punishment Sword as my life bond. When I reach Realm 8 or close to Realm 8, none of them will be a match for me. But if Jing Xiu also reaches Realm 8, and Yuan Wu goes further on the path of Realm 8, I may not be a match for them if they work together. So it is only a matter of time." After a pause, Ding Ning continued, "Even if Yuan Wu does not use the elixir of life, or if he is lucky enough to find a way to stop the elixir of life from causing him to lose his mind, these matters can still use up his mental energy, and delay his steps forward in cultivation. As long as he does not go too far in Realm 8, then even if Jing Xiu reaches Realm 8, when she encounters the two of them working together, she has a chance of winning. Also, I think that when one side is a threat to the other, the two of them will not be the same as before." Yantai Guanjian's furrowed brows relaxed. In his view, anyone could make a mistake, especially a person who, because of their nature, could make the same mistake. However, no one would object to Ding Ning's words. After the battle in Chongling, all the cultivators in the world would not have any objections to his power. Even after Yuanwu flattened the mountain with his sword at the Deer Mountain Conference, in the view of many cultivators of the dynasties, if Wang Jingmeng had gone to fight those grandmasters, he would have won more easily than Yuanwu, who had entered Realm 8. From Ding Ning's words, Yantai Guanjian sensed something else. You won't need too much time to officially step into level 7, and even approach the peak of your cultivation back then? He looked at Ding Ning and couldn't help but ask, also, you said that you understood some of the problems related to Realm 8. You might even be able to reach Realm 8? Ding Ning nodded slowly. There was no arrogance on his face. When he obtained the heaven-replenishing divine art after the Min Mountain Sword trials, it was only a matter of time before he surpassed his former peak. However, what they lacked was time. Yuanwu and Jing Xiu were much stronger, and reminded him again and again to be more careful. Based on Lin Zhuzhou's present plans, I think he wants to take Jiaodong Commandery. He looked at Yantai Guanjian and the others and said, if I can take Jiaodong Commandery, I should be able to win some more time. Ding Ning, I do not care who you are, but I thought of you as a friend. Even if you did not think of me as a friend, you are telling me how to deal with my parents in front of me. Do you think you are a gentleman? A furious voice broke the heavy silence. This furious voice came from Fu Su. Fu Su looked at Ding Ning, who was looking calmly at him. Because of his anger, his chest rose and fell violently. Either you kill me or release me. Previously, you held me hostage because you wanted to save your life. Now, do you still need me to save your life? You are too young, so you think of some things too simply. Ding Ning looked calmly at Fu Su and said, the reason I let you listen to this is because you will be part of the exchange. I will have Qian Mu bring half of the elixir of life to Yuanwu, and the other half to you. Only when the two are added together will there be enough power for Yuanwu to change. You? Fu Su was so angry his body turned cold, and he could not speak. You need to see some things clearly. You need to have the intelligence to make your own judgment on any matter. Ding Ning turned his head away and said, why are you doing this to him? Looking at Fu Su, who angrily left, and Qian Mu, who immediately chased after him, Zhang Sun Qianxue asked softly in puzzlement, I do not hate Fu Su. Naturally, you cannot hate him because of Yuanwu and Jing Xiu. He is bait. Ding Ning frowned slightly and responded, Jing Xiu made her choice earlier. So I feel that if she wants to stop Yuanwu from getting the elixir of life, the simplest way for her is to kill Fu Su and destroy the other half of the elixir. Zhang Sun Qianxue stilled slightly and felt slightly cold, but she felt that this was not impossible. She does not have many people she can use now, but the Chu territory is in chaos. We have an enemy like the Qi, and we do not have many people we can use. If we can get rid of some of the people around her, our people will be safer. A rare cold smile appeared at the corners of Ding Ning's mouth. Everyone knows that she is cold, but Fu Su is her son. She can even give up on Fu Su, and if she orders people to kill Fu Su, Yuanwu will suspect Yuanwu. Yuanwu will suspect if Fu Su is their son, and if she is in a hurry to destroy something. If that is the case, it is too cruel for Fu Su. Zhang Sun Qianxue shook her head and could not help but say. Ding Ning smiled in self-mockery. This matter is actually very simple. Just return the elixir of life and Fu Su to them. If they are not as cruel as I say, nothing cruel will happen. When I speak of Fu Su, I am actually speaking of myself. Ding Ning took a deep breath and looked at Zhang Sun Qianxue. He said, before experiencing many cruel things, I also saw everything as simple. But I had not expected some people to be so cruel. When you make such a cruel decision, will you feel happy or will you feel pain? No one could answer his last question. No one could guess if the two people in the highest positions in the Chongling Imperial Palace were in pain or happiness. Chapter 698. A sudden downpour of rain did not completely dissipate the heat of the Nanquan commanderies. But for the people of the Nanquan commanderies, the air was cool. Back then, the Bazan Kendo ground and Wang Jingmeng had been erased from the history books of Chongling and the entire Qin dynasty. So it was widely spread in the Chu, Yan, and Qi. Many cultivators of the dynasties who were thought of as gods had died in that battle in Chongling, at Wang Jingmeng's sword. So in the legends of the other dynasties, Wang Jingmeng was a demon god. Now, this demon god had first come to the Zhou family, and then the Xia family to rest. As to how he had been reborn with the 9-death silkworm, the people of the Nanquan commanderies could not imagine. What was most important to them was that when the Xia family had no objections, this meant that the Chu dynasty army that had retreated from Yangshan commandery would soon arrive, and the Qin army would follow. The Chu dynasty had been strong for many years. Many of the people in this area had not experienced war. No one knew if the exhausted Qin army would stop here, but they had to prepare for war. The night Ding Ning and the others entered the Xia family, the leaders of the Nanquan commanderies had a secret meeting under Gong Yangji's call. Then the families started to organize migration and set up defenses. Before the situation was clear, the Nanquan commanderies were like exiled cities that accepted spies and cultivators from all sides. But starting from this time, the families started to purge them again and again, expelling all of these people or directly killing them. The Nanquan commanderies had operated in this area for a long time. Also, this area was not an important capital or a stronghold used in war. The people here were not complicated. So from a certain point of view, the Nanquan commanderies were not much different from a sex space. Two unfamiliar figures suddenly appeared in a certain river port amidst the storm. Many low and cautious shouts sounded, and then there was the sound of energy from some seal weapons being activated. "Take me to see Ding Ning. Do you not see who I am?" one of the people said. This was a woman's voice. However, this voice was wild and untamed, resonating with the falling raindrops. Every raindrop seemed to be echoed by someone, causing this voice to quickly form a raging tide that filled the entire world. All the cultivators in this river port immediately understood the identity of this woman. Bai Shanshui had arrived. I really did not expect this. When Bai Shanshui appeared in front of Ding Ning in the Xia family compound, she said this first. Ding Ning looked at her. My identity or the nether floats? Bai Shanshui laughed self-mockingly. It's all the same. Ding Ning looked at her and Li Yunrui, not responding, and waited for her to speak. There are a lot of people around you now. Bai Shanshui glanced at Tantai Guanjian next to Ding Ning and said directly, if we call on the people of the Zhao Sword Furnace, and your Ba Mountain Sword Field, and charge into the Chongling Imperial Palace, what do you think our chances of success are? Tantai Guanjian stilled. Ding Ning could not help but laugh. Bai Shanshui spoke very casually, as if she was a child playing house. However, only a person as bold as her could say such words so casually. I know you are afraid of trouble. It is good if we can end things like this, but it is not so simple. Ding Ning put away his smile and shook his head. They are all seriously wounded. Not many can fight. Even more importantly, if we fight like this, even if we win, I do not know how many people will die. Of course, there is another possibility. Even if we go slowly, people will die in the end. Ding Ning's expression grew more serious. He said seriously, but I understand Yuanwu and Jing Xiu better than you. When they are certain their lives are threatened, they will decisively give up some things. They will leave behind a way to escape. So to kill them, I always thought there were only two ways. One is to take everything they have, the other is at a time when they cannot escape and have to face it. Bai Shanshui nodded. She accepted Ding Ning's words. You should have heard of the 12 shamans? She said. Ding Ning immediately frowned. He immediately understood. This is why the Qi Emperor and Jing Xiu are working together? Bai Shanshui smiled with narrowed eyes. Your old acquaintance from White Goat Cave, Su Qin, is a puppet working with the Qi Emperor to carry out her will. Ding Ning stilled slightly and then said, He is much better than Li Lingjun. Bai Shanshui said, He used the price of helping us take the 12 shamans to exchange for the human sovereign jade annulus. Ding Ning thought and said, Even more importantly, he gave the human sovereign jade annulus. What gave him the confidence that the human sovereign jade annulus would help him reach Realm 7? Bai Shanshui grew silent. She faintly felt that there was a problem here. There is one possibility. The human sovereign jade annulus went from Su Qin to Zheng Xiu's hands, and we took the 12 shamans. What happened next was a war between us and the Qi dynasty. Ding Ning looked at her and said, We and the Qi dynasty were both wounded, and the 12 shamans did not stay in the Qi dynasty. The Qi dynasty did not get any real benefits, but Zheng Xiu got the human sovereign jade annulus. Bai Shanshui frowned deeply. What you said makes sense. But this is good news. There are places we can operate in here. Ding Ning slowly said, We can give the human sovereign jade annulus, and we will take the 12 shamans. We need to think about how to operate here. Times are different from the past. Bai Shanshui nodded and then said, Since it is you, you cannot not see the secret of the Lonely Mountain Sword Hoard. What is the Lonely Mountain Sword Hoard? Ding Ning grimaced but did not conceal it. He said, The Lonely Mountain Sword Hoard is actually an enormous formation, and it must use the ground in Chongling to set up the formation. Back then, the Lonely Mountain Sword sect should have been located around Chongling, and this should have been their protective formation. Also, to set up such a large formation, they need many large building hubs like the arrow towers in Chongling to guide the earth energy. Bai Shanshui took a deep breath. Then, she sighed emotionally. So this thing is actually useful to Zheng Xiu? For this Lonely Mountain Sword Hoard, she had paid a great price, and even her own life. But the Lonely Mountain Sword Hoard was just something like this. Chapter 699. Yan, Zhongshu Commandery, now called Country Guarding Commandery, was a fief the Yan Emperor had given to Zhang Yi. When Zhang Yi arrived at Zhongshu Commandery, he was shocked. Zhongshu Commandery was very large and prosperous, and even had some of the atmosphere of the Yan capital. Such a large city was given to him as a fief? When he arrived at the former Zhongshu Marquisate establishment, now the Country Guarding Marquisate establishment, Zhang Yi was so shocked he could not speak. It was not because the estate took up an astounding amount of space, or because the Marquisate establishment had many retainers and cultivators. In reality, as the leader of the rebellion against the Yan Emperor, the retainers and private army of the Marquisate establishment had been destroyed long ago. What made him so shocked that he was speechless was that there were so many beauties. In the first reception hall of the Marquisate establishment, there were dozens of beautiful young women and women welcoming him, not even including the attendants standing outside. These beautiful women and young women were the wives and concubines of the Zhongshu Marquisate. They all had their own characteristics, and some were even women of other races from outside the pass. Zhang Yi had never thought that the Zhongshu Marquisate would leave him such a fortune. When he heard the official responsible for the delivery seriously count these wives and concubine according to the list, Zhang Yi was so bewildered he almost fainted. Yu Yi and Murong Xiaoi, who were following him, had not thought there would be such a play, especially when they saw the extraordinary attire of the beautiful young women and women. Their faces were even redder than Zhang Yi. What, so many beauties, does the Country Guarding Marquisate not like them? When Zhang Yi unconsciously waved his hand to decline this fortune, a hearty laugh sounded in the hall. A young man walked out of the hall with his hands behind his back and appeared in their sight. When she saw the handsome face of this young man, Murong Xiaoi's expression turned solemn. She bowed seriously and said, "Greetings to the Crown Prince." Zhang Yi was stunned for a moment before he reacted and immediately bowed. This handsome man with a hearty laugh was actually the crown prince of the great Yen dynasty, Ji Dan. Ji Dan had a good reputation in the Yen dynasty. He had been training with the border army since he was young and had deep relationships with many generals. Murong Xiaoyi had seen him many times, so she recognized him at a glance. I didn't know the crown prince was here. I've made a fool of myself. After Zhang Yi bowed, he still felt that his face was burning. There are some expressions that can't be concealed. There are so many beauties here that anyone who sees them would be moved. Just now, I'm looking at you from behind. Although you're shy and can't speak, there's no greed in your eyes. Instead, you really want to reject me. So, just like the rumors say, Marquis Zhenghua is a modest gentleman. Ji Dan smiled again and said, "But I want to ask you seriously, you have accepted my dynasty's reward. If my dynasty fights with the Qin in the future, you may become the object of disdain by the Qin." Why? These were also things that Zhang Yi had thought about. He felt a little sad and unconsciously lowered his head. "I want to help my junior brother. So you really are a true gentleman." Ji Dan put away his smile and looked at Zhang Yi. Then he said seriously, "It was my idea to have you become the Zhenghua Marquis. Or rather, it was my arrangement." Zhang Yi looked up at the solemn Ji Dan. He did not know how to respond. I don't know if Zhongshu Marquis really likes beauty or if he wants the outside world to feel that he is addicted to women. These years, he has been collecting beautiful women. Ji Dan's gaze turned to the beautiful women that filled the hall and said indifferently, "These are all 1,000 gold concubines. Not only are they beautiful, they all have their own strength. If you don't like them, you can sell them outside and exchange them for a large sum of money. But these people are homeless and do not know who they will land in the future. Some people's fates may become tragic. Now that they are at your disposal, will you choose to sell them?" Hearing this, Zhang Yi finally understood that Ji Dan was actually asking him. He was startled, hesitated for a moment, and then said, "If it's really up to me, I will let them choose a good family for themselves. I will respect their wishes." All the women in the hall looked at Zhang Yi with respect, flattery, and awe. They even felt joy when they saw that Zhang Yi was young and handsome. But when they heard Zhang Yi's words, most of the women in the hall showed true gratitude and respect. "I understand what you mean. You will marry them off like your daughters. This is where you are different from other people." Ji Dan looked deeply at Zhang Yi. "So you do not do things purely for profit." Zhang Yi still did not know how to respond. But he saw the changes in the expressions of the women out of the corner of his eyes. He thought if he could make the decision, then he would do this. There will be a battle between the Yen and Qin. I have actually stayed in the Qin for a long time. In reality, starting from the Bazin Kendo ground, after many years of subtle influence, all the Qin people have naturally accepted the idea of unifying the world. But the final result can be the Qin destroying the Yen, or the Yen destroying the Qin. For me, of course, I hope that the dynasty that unifies the world will be the Yen dynasty. Ji Dan was silent for a moment and then slowly said, "Fortunately, the Bazin Kendo ground is not tolerated in Chongling. This way we have the possibility of standing together with the Bazin Kendo ground. The Bazin Kendo ground wants a dynasty that unifies the world and no longer has wars. In the end, regardless of whether it is the Yen or the Qin, they will be united. The reason I want you to become a true country-guarding marquis, and not just a title, is because after so many years, I do not understand the elders of the Bazin Kendo ground. But I can see that you are a true gentleman. If I can show my determination and true good intentions, you will not fail me. Of course, you were able to become a country-guarding marquis because of what you possess." Ji Dan paused and glanced at Yu Yi and Murong Xiaoyi next to Zhang Yi. He said, "You and Yu Yi represent the two lines of Celestial Seal sect. Now that you and Yu Yi have become friends, you represent all of Celestial Seal sect. You and Murong Xiaoyi have an extraordinary relationship, and can also be accepted by the military. Zhang Yi's forehead sweated as he heard this. He was slightly bewildered and said, "I did not think so much. I just want to help my junior sect brother." "You will be of great help to him." Ji Dan looked seriously at Zhang Yi and said, "You will truly possess all of country guarding commandery. I will have the entire Murong family support you. You will quickly have a powerful army and many cultivators." The previous Zhongshu marquis was not useless. Among these wives and concubines, some are the result of marriage. The reason why they were here was because their clans or tribes needed the support of a real marquis of Great Yen. So even if you give them freedom, they cannot leave. But you are different from the previous Zhongshu marquis. You treat them sincerely, and they will treat you sincerely. They will also be of great help to you. Before dismissing these concubines and having them return to their rooms to rest, Ji Dan added these words. When these concubines all left, the enormous hall became empty and quiet. When only he, Zhang Yi, Yu Yi and Murong Xiaoyi were left, his expression grew even more serious. "In reality, I have you quickly become the country guarding marquis because there is another crucial problem. My father's health has a great problem." "What?" Murong Xiaoyi was the most sensitive to these words. She immediately sank into great shock. "In reality, everyone knows that my father does not have any talent in cultivation. His cultivation and combat power are not as good as mine." Ji Dan took a deep breath and said as calmly as he could, "But the truth is that many years ago, there was a problem with his cultivation, and his body has a great hidden illness. In reality, by the time of the Deer Mountain Conference, his health was already terrible, and he used medicine to hide it. Recently, his health has been rapidly deteriorating, and he does not have much time left. So in reality, I have taken over the court. So I need you to truly possess great power. I need you to truly guard the country." Ji Dan exhaled deeply and bowed to Zhang Yi. Chapter 700. The true country stabilizing marquis, and not just a decoration? In a certain official residence in the Chu capital, Su Qin put down the secret letter in his hand, picked up a cup of fine wine from the table next to him, and smiled faintly. The woman who was pouring wine for him was dressed in yellow palace robes, her skin whiter than snow, and her beauty unparalleled. This woman was surnamed Zhen, the second daughter of the former Zhen family of the Chu capital, and one of the most famous beauties in the Chu capital. For men with true power, the identity of a woman like this was more attractive than her beauty. In the past, countless children of nobles dreamed of having a beautiful woman, but most of them could not even see her face. Now, she was just a maid that he could hunt at will. Su Qin's eyes were not complacent, but full of self-mockery. He turned his head in boredom to look at the sky outside the window. At this time, the sky was gradually darkening. It was not night yet, but there were stars shining in the sky. Is this fate? I just took power in the Chu, and you are going to become the left and right hand of the Yen Crown Prince. Su Qin looked at the two stars that first appeared in the sky, and said slowly inside. "Official." A low but powerful voice sounded outside the door. Hearing this cultivator's voice, Su Qin's eyes lit up like stars. After obtaining his permission, a seemingly ordinary wooden box was presented in front of him. When the quiet room quieted down and only he and the beautiful woman were left in the room, he slowly opened the box. There was a piece of jade inside the box that gave off gentle and profound light. "I like plain clothes and cut your hair short." Su Qin first closed the box, then raised his head, glanced at the woman beside him and said. This beautiful woman was first surprised by the favor, but when she heard the second half of his words, her lips trembled and her face paled. Her long black hair was like a waterfall. Even the women of the Chu capital, who were as famous as her, were envious. She did not know how much effort she had put into it, but the other wanted her to cut it. This servant understands. She didn't dare to disobey. She lowered her head and softly agreed. Su Qin placed the wooden box in his sleeve. When he stood up, a trace of ridicule appeared on the corners of his mouth. Actually, he didn't like short hair. However, he liked the feeling of conquest. When Chongling was shrouded in moonlight, a gray-robed man walked out of the backyard of an ordinary family. His skin was strangely white. Under the moonlight, his skin appeared somewhat translucent, and one could even faintly see the color of his veins. His gray robes seemed to have a strange power that caused faint gray mist to appear around him. He quickly merged with Chongling's night. Several hours after he disappeared from this street, the sound of crying suddenly rang out from the backyard of this ordinary house. The cries were ear-piercing, just like the many cries during the purge of Chongling a month ago. A series of violent, ear-piercing sounds could be heard. The cultivators flew over, leaving their shadows in the air. "It is the second imperial prince." Soon, there were uncontrollable gasps. Bright sword lights shot into the sky, and the cries in the yard grew louder. The gray-robed man was already by a river outside the city. He saw the light from afar, and had the same disdainful expression as Su Qin. Just as he had expected, while Chongling looked as majestic as before in the night, after the spring war against the Chu and the chaos of Min Mountain Sword Sect, Chongling's control over cultivators like him who were skilled in hiding in the darkness had greatly weakened. How many grandmasters were left in Chongling right now? In the night, Yuan Wu slowly looked up. He was on his way back. As usual, the furnishings in the tent were very simple and crude. Even the tea was brewed with the most common tea leaf. He had a secret letter in his hand. This letter came from the Gongyang family of the Chu. If a wealthy family like the Gongyang family wanted to contact the Qin army, they could deliver the secret letter to him as quickly as possible. Many years ago, some of the flying beasts the Qin army used to send messages were faster than the cultivators of the world. The attitude of the Nanquan families was very important to the battle between the Qin and Chu. Yet this secret letter, which had been sent to him as the most important military intelligence, was not the work of the Gongyang family after he opened it. He was familiar with the handwriting, so his guess was correct. While this was the result he did not want to believe the most, Ding Ning was not that person's heir, but that person's rebirth. "You want to send someone to talk to me. Talk about what? Since this is the case, I will slow down and wait to see what you want to talk to me about." Yuan Wu had a disdainful expression at the corners of his mouth. His emotions did not fluctuate, and there was no fear in his eyes. While that person had made him feel fear many times many years ago, he had passed the time of fear. Almost at the same time, in the deathly silent imperial palace of Chongling, the mistress who was also reading secret letters from all over the world grew paler. Her body grew colder and colder. At this time, she did not know of the contact between Ding Ning and Yuan Wu. Her coldness came from Lin Zhujiu and the other people of the Bazin Kendo ground. Regardless of whether it was the Yin Mountain, Yangshan Commandery, or the reports from the Chu, she could clearly conclude that the people of the Bazin Kendo ground had not contributed in these battles. Then where had they gone? Then there was only one possibility. They had gone to Jiaodong Commandery. She could lose Fusu, but not Jiaodong Commandery. But was this still within her control? Her mind could not help but fluctuate violently. Other than in the void where a few cultivators could communicate, the light of some stars started to vibrate violently. On the distant Chu and Yen border, a woman dressed in men's clothing suddenly looked up. The vital energy in her body was instantly released like a blazing furnace, and even the dust on the ground seemed to be ignited. She was Zhao Si. Just as Jing Xiu's mind fluctuated, she once again sensed the life-bond sword that originally belonged to her. This was a feeling of being connected by flesh and blood. But as she gritted her teeth, she suppressed her impulse to take back the sword. She took a deep breath and quietly tried to capture the sword's trajectory, but she didn't really come into contact with it. In the cold void, her life-bond sword that had been nurtured from the strongest true fire, and the most sincere sword essence of the sword furnace slowly seeped into the coldest star fire. It had undergone a strange change. The blade was no longer fiery red, but the color of the stars, silver white and translucent. Chapter 701. This small sword floated silently in the cold space, accompanied only by some star and meteor fragments. Occasionally, there would be an unusual flash that spilled out from inside, causing this small sword to look like a complete star. When the unusual light accumulated to a certain level around the sword, transparent crystals would form on the sword like frost. But because the surface of the sword was too smooth, these ice crystals could not stick to it. They fell off the sword and fell downwards. These ice crystals brought out long lines of light in the void. They quickly expanded and became loose. Soon, it was as if ice flowers were blooming in the void. This was a very mysterious and beautiful scene. But no one knew what was happening in this cold space. These ice flowers would disappear completely before they touched the primal energies of the universe that most cultivators could sense. Then they would turn into invisible threads of energy that flowed into the primal energies of the universe. The changes of the sun, moon, and stars, the energy vibrations from the outer realms, and the star energies that could not reach the mortal world would all become obstacles to cultivators' cultivation. The star energies that Jing Xiu had changed were even more so. They could easily merge into the original paths of many energies in this world, and silently change the primal energies of the universe that cultivators were familiar with. From a certain point of view, this meant extinction. This meant that many existing cultivation methods, the experiences passed down by the predecessors, and the methods to teach future cultivators how to sense the primal energies of the universe would be completely ineffective. If this small sword grew stronger, and she grew stronger, she would be able to silently corrode and change the established primal energies of the universe, and silently destroy the world of cultivators. Even now, the ice crystals coming out of the small sword that she was controlling, and the many cultivators where the ice flowers fell, their cultivation would be greatly affected. Especially when some cultivators' breakthroughs were blocked. This could affect them for decades or their entire lives. There was an ice flower that fell on the cold lands of the Donghu border. This ice flower had silently disappeared, turning into threads of energy that flowed in the wind. That small sword naturally floated in the space of nirvana, just like the stardust and meteorite fragments. It only followed some kind of natural trajectory. The vital energy that seeped out from the sword was also not under Jing Xiu's control. Instead, it casually floated all over the world, and no one knew about it. Yet when this ice flower merged with the wind and blew past a tall mountain, this mountain covered in glaciers that seemed to be eternally unchanging suddenly surged with majestic essence energy. This mountain was the holy mountain in the hearts of the Donghu ascetic. All the ascetic monks and many Donghu cultivators who wanted to have a breakthrough would choose to cultivate here. Many people thought that this was just a matter of faith. But what happened today caused all the people cultivating in the mountain to understand that this was not just a matter of faith, but protection. These vast energies came from some of the hardest caves to reach halfway up the mountain. These caves were so cold that even the cultivators transporting food and water could not reach them often. So only ascetic monks who had unimaginable needs could stay for a long time. Many ascetic monks, in order to comprehend and think better, even forgot the passage of time, and did not speak. Many ascetics had stayed in these caves for decades. The flowing and changing primordial qi had become eternal in their perception. The only thing they needed to break through was the limits of their bodies and minds. But at this time they sensed this change. The fall of this ice flower, to their perception, was an evil thing from beyond the heavens. As the majestic essence qi rushed out, an invisible barrier seemed to have appeared above the sacred palace. The flowing wind was forcibly restrained by the power in the caves. There was a soft pop. The ice flower that had turned into threads of energy was forced to reappear in the air, but in the next moment, it was completely destroyed by the power and disappeared without a trace. This fight was just a short moment, but because it affected the entire holy mountain, all the cultivators cultivating inside sensed it. The cave that Li Shixing was cultivating in belonged to the old monk, who had followed Ding Ning. It had been high up. At this time, Hu Jingjing was brewing tea in a shelter at the entrance of the cave. She had just put a piece of butter that could resist the cold of the mountain into the tea. She hadn't even used her Jinyuan to raise the temperature of the tea when she saw the strange rainbow light produced when the ice flower disappeared in the sky. Then, she felt a slight vibration from the peak of the sacred mountain. Then there were the sounds of many glaciers on the mountain exploding due to the vibrations, growing from soft to loud. She was shocked and did not understand what was happening, but she instinctively turned to look at Li Shixing in the cave. Li Shixing was sitting cross-legged on the old monk's couch. The crystal yellow light in front of him was changing into various sword shapes. Ever since he came here from the Wuji ancestral mountain, he had stayed here to cultivate for a long time, but he had not had a special breakthrough. Hu Jingjing also stayed in Donghu to cultivate, and often took care of Li Shixing's food and lodging. The mountain wind blew her face purple-black, but she did not lose her patience. She was just worried that Li Shixing would lose his patience and miss an important breakthrough opportunity. When she turned to look back at Li Shixing, the statue-like Li Shixing opened his eyes. He didn't say anything to Hu Jingjing as usual. Instead, he took a deep breath and looked down at his lower body. The bedding under him could not see its original color. Because of the grease and dust, it had turned purple-black. But at this time, as the mountain's energy rippled, rays of golden light came out from inside. This golden light was not strong, but it continued to shine up, even reflecting on the ceiling above his head, forming many lines that looked like unique characters. Hu Jingjing was so shocked she almost shouted. She instinctively covered her mouth in fear of disturbing Li Shixing. While she could not understand these lines, she could only speculate that they were marks left behind by the old monk when he was cultivating. Because he had fought against the object that had fallen from the sky, they had been naturally activated. But she could sense from Li Shixing's presence that these lines seemed to have become an important opportunity for him, and had a unique reaction to his body. Li Shixing's expression turned from shock, joy, and bewilderment to stupefaction. There was a soft pop. The blood and true essence in his body seemed to burn. When the golden light slowly disappeared, a golden light overflowed from his body. It was as if all of his flesh and bones had been burned into golden lava, overflowing his skin and wrapping his body into a golden man. The sword in front of him that had not taken form started to twist violently. Chapter 702. The energy burned into a golden liquid, causing Li Shixing to feel that every tiny part of his body was changing dramatically. The golden lines flowing out of the bedding and the rocks were the cultivation methods left behind by the Donghu monk. What was recorded was the supreme method of the ascetic monks to sanctify their bodies. This was the inheritance of a legacy. It was also a chance for Li Shixing to advance. Li Shixing could clearly sense that his body was quickly growing stronger. This kind of strength in all aspects, and the fact that he had been cultivating on this mountain for a long time, caused the flow of primal energies of the universe that he could not touch to become clear lines in his mind. If he persisted in completing this transformation, he could officially step through that door, and become one of the first cultivators to reach Realm 7 in this generation of Chongling. But he was not a Donghu cultivator who had cultivated the ascetic method for a long time. No matter if it was his body, or the crystal sword connected to his energy, he felt that he could not support this advancement process. The golden magma-like liquid seeping out of his body covered his face. His energy was about to be burned away, like he was truly suffocating. But at this time, many unique chants sounded throughout the mountain. Many ascetic cultivators at the base of the mountain walked out of their caves in shock, not knowing what was happening. Following this grand chant, many faint golden lines of light came out of the many caves on the mountain peak. With powerful and vast life energies, they flooded into Li Shixing's cave. The old monk who had followed Ding Ning had been one of the best of these ascetic cultivators, and the leader and hope of their branch. At this crucial moment, they clearly sensed that Li Shixing had received the old monk's inheritance. Many of them, because they cultivated the same method, had a unique connection with the old monk. They knew that the old monk's life was like a candle in the wind that could be extinguished at any time. From a certain point of view, Li Shixing was the chosen of this mountain, and their hope in the future. These cultivators did not hesitate to contribute their essence energy, the extremely pure energy that had been refined over decades or even centuries. These energies carried the power of benevolence and blessing, charging into Li Shixing's body and quickly completing the advancement process. There was a loud boom. The cave Li Shixing was in was filled with golden light. The golden flames covering his body turned into fine dots of light. As they flew outwards, the constantly changing crystal sword turned completely golden and then silently disintegrated into fine particles. In the next moment, an enormous whirlpool formed above the mountain. Enormous amounts of primal energies of the universe flowed into Li Shixing's body along with the golden light particles. Li Shixing opened his eyes. When he opened his eyes, all the strange phenomena began to dissipate. There was still a rumbling sound in the sky, as if a giant mountain was moving. The chants were still coming from the caves above, but they were low and peaceful, like sincere blessings. Li Shixing understood what had happened. He looked at the excited Hu Jingjing and bit his lips to calm himself down. Then he walked out of the cavern and bowed deeply to the cultivators who had given him crucial help. The glacier on the mountain continued to crack. Several extremely sharp ice shards fell down. One of them was long and narrow like a blade. When it fell above his body, its speed was not much different from a true flying sword. But in the process of this bow, he did not make any extra movements. When the ice blade landed on his face, there was only a faint flash of golden light. It didn't even leave a mark on his skin before the ice blade was completely shattered. In the distant Chu lands, in a quiet room of the Xia family, the Donghu monk who had been sitting in a deathly stillness and with a weak presence suddenly raised his head. A golden flame ignited in the depths of his dim yellow eyes, as if a fire seed had been ignited in his body. What happened? Ding Ning quickly appeared in front of him. In these days, he had stayed in the Nanquan commanderies mainly to use the power of the Nanquan commanderies to heal the Donghu monk and others. But in the past days, even if he and Qin Yaoyin used all their means, they seemed unable to reverse the old monk's aging and death. But now, he sensed a change in the old monk's body. Inheritance? The old monk said softly with emotion, "I was right about that young man. He has had a breakthrough." Ding Ning stilled and could not help but laugh. He knew that the methods of these Donghu ascetics were very unique. But when Li Shixing had a breakthrough, the unique energy had caused the primal energies of the universe to strengthen the old monk's vitality. This was something he had not expected. "I know you admire him, but I had not thought you would pass on your legacy to him." Ding Ning looked at the old monk and said seriously, "All of this depends on chance. I left the cave to him because I left him the possibility of cultivating my method. But whether he can comprehend and discover it is up to the heavens." The old monk smiled. "If he can obtain it, it is his. Previously, your wounds were so serious that you could not travel for a long time, and I was worried about leaving you in one place. Now, it should not be a problem to travel with you. Lin Zhujiu and the others have sent news. They have confirmed the location of the Jiaodong Commandery treasure trove. I need to take you to Jiaodong Commandery. If you can get the treasure trove of Jiaodong Commandery, it should be of great help to your wounds." Ding Ning looked inquisitively at the old monk, wanting to get a definite answer. For a cultivator like the old monk, only he knew his own body's condition the best. The old monk did not speak and just nodded. Ding Ning bid farewell and walked out. At this time, the moonlight was bright. He looked up at the gentle moonlight and was filled with a strange emotion. Taking over Jiaodong Commandery was something to be happy about. But many years ago, who would have thought that he and the woman from Jiaodong Commandery would reach such a step? The bright moon made people think of home, because all the moons in the world were the same, waxing and waning. Wang Taishu felt slightly emotional. He had never thought that he would obtain rare stability in the Yan Xanadu far from Chongling. In the rebellion of the Zhongshu Marquis, he had received the support of the Yan military. Adding on Zhang Yi's Marquis title and the Yan Crown Prince's care, he was not just a simple dragon king in the world. If the Yan Crown Prince had not changed, no one would be able to shake his stability. Today he had a guest, a young person who had come from afar. Chapter 703. What appeared in his sight was a young person wearing a bamboo hat and plain robes of coarse cloth. This young person had many battle scars on his body. Even though his robes were bandaged, there were still traces of blood seeping out. Clearly, this young person had traveled a long distance. Even though he did not show any fatigue, the travel-worn feeling could not escape Wang Taishu's perception. "I had not expected to see you so soon." The young person took off his bamboo hat and bowed seriously to him. "You are skilled in concealment, but you are skilled in dealing with cultivators. Many times you ignore the gazes of ordinary people." Wang Taishu smiled slightly and said, "Many habits cannot be changed in detail. Some people can easily judge that you are Qin. Yi Jingnan, you are one of Ding Ning's people. Of course, you are worthy of my trust." After a pause, Wang Taishu's expression grew serious. "You have come here because of his arrangements. What does he want me to help with?" Yi Jingnan looked with admiration at this gangster who had come out of Chongling. Honestly, he knew that among the people related to Ding Ning, he was an existence that was easily overlooked. Compared to Jing Liuli and Li Shixing, even people like Nangong Kaishu and Hu Jingjing would attract more attention due to their family or sect. Yet, on the second day after arriving at the Yan Xanadu, he encountered Wang Taishu's people. The other had accurately judged his true identity and brought him here. It was not a coincidence that this gangster had become such a powerhouse in the Yan Xanadu, and definitely not because of the favor of the Crown Prince. He respectfully nodded his head, but didn't say anything. He only carefully took out several bamboo slips from a leather pouch on his body. Then, he pulled out a small sword from the sword pouch on his thigh. He removed a mechanism on the sword hilt that was hard for ordinary people to detect, and then twisted the sword hilt down. The hilt was empty. He took out several cowhide papers. Then he spread out the papers, pieced them together, and put the bamboo slips on top of the papers. Wang Taishu had been watching his every movement. So when he finished, Wang Taishu's brow furrowed deeply. He could see that this was a catalogue of some kind of seal weapon. "What is this?" he asked gravely with a deep frown. He knew that Ding Ning had arranged ahead of time for someone like Yi Zhengnan to deliver this catalogue to him. Essence Seal Metal Man Yi Zhengnan answered quickly and simply, "The seal weapon manufacturing catalogue of the Yu dynasty." Wang Taishu's deep frown did not relax. He looked silently at Yi Zhengnan, wanting to learn more. "A powerful seal weapon that can counter the nether float." Yi Zhengnan knew what he was thinking, so he did not hesitate to continue. "Once the nether floating ships are completed, they do not need the cultivators of the Qi dynasty. They will be the strongest seal weapons in the world." Back then, Zheng Xiu learned some of the Yu dynasty's seal weapon creation methods. The nether float was something created by merging the Yu dynasty's seal weapon creation methods with the Qi dynasty's Yin and Ghost. But this essence seal metal man is something that surpasses the seal weapon level she knows of. Wang Taishu nodded to show he understood. Then he looked down and started to carefully examine the catalogue. Putting aside his feelings as a Qin person, from a strategic point of view, the Qin dynasty's nether float fleet was the most intimidating weapon. No city could stop the nether float fleet that suddenly appeared. Most of the large cities were built along the river. Based on the movements of the Chu army and Ding Ning's actions at Nanquan Commandery, it was clear that the Bazin Kendo ground wanted to take Jiaodong Commandery. Jiaodong Commandery was surrounded by water, and the main cities were rich in water. The nether float fleet was naturally the greatest threat. It is not hard to find craftsmen who can make weapons. We just have to find them in the Chu dynasty. But it is impossible to find so much black gold sand. Even I am powerless. Wang Taishu looked at it for almost an hour. Then he looked up at Yi Zhengnan and explained in more detail, the other main materials may not be a problem, but the black gold sand is a special kind of clay from the Yellow Dragon Mountain of the Qin dynasty. While I can send some people back, the production of black gold sand is very low. It is a raw material for making some powerful seal weapons. It is used to mix in some essence gold that conflicts with energies. The price is very high. This black gold sand is beyond my ability. Someone will transport black gold sand and chun crystals from the Qin. Yi Zhengnan was slightly surprised. But his surprise was that Wang Taishu's ability had exceeded his expectations. He had only raised this one item. When Wang Taishu heard his response, he was shocked. Someone can transport black gold sand and celestial crystals from the Qin? Yes, even the chun crystals will be transported from the Qin. You do not need to spend effort to find them. Yi Zhengnan looked at him and nodded. He said, "You only need to prepare the other materials and find suitable craftsmen." Wang Taishu was silent. Many breaths later, his gaze landed on the catalogue in front of him. In the view of the outside world, other than announcing his identity, Ding Ning had not done anything else. But just from the things that had been delivered to him, he knew that Ding Ning's counterattack against Jing Xiu and Yuanwu had completely started, and on many levels. While he was not a skilled craftsman, even with his insight, he could see that this essence seal gold man was a terrifying seal weapon. It could not only deal with the nether floats, but could suppress most seal weapons in the world. If black gold sand and celestial crystal, which were extremely expensive and produced in a single place, could be transported here, then he should be able to collect the rest of the items listed in this catalogue. There is one more thing he wants you to help me with. Yi Zhengnan changed the topic and said softly. He wants you to help me find a cultivation place in the Yin dynasty called the Elegant Nunnery. Elegant Nunnery? Wang Taishu stilled. He had never heard of such a sect before. This cultivation place was originally in the Yen Void Mountain. It was just a small sect, but he wants you to help me get one of their cultivation records, Song of Elegance, Yi Zhengnan quickly explained. While I do not know what is recorded in that record, it should be of great use to me. After saying this, Yi Zhengnan took out a thin book from his sleeve and handed it to Wang Taishu. Wang Taishu could not help but say, "What is this?" "This is something he gave you. He said it is useful for your cultivation," Yi Zhengnan said seriously. Chapter 704. I don't understand what you are thinking. There was a pear mountain in the Nanquan towns with many pear trees. There was a platform at the top of the mountain that connected to a courtyard built on the side of a cliff. This was the property of the Zhou family, one of the three powerful families of Nanquan. From the platform and the window of the courtyard, one could clearly see all the activity in the important ports of the Nanquan town. At this time, in a tea room used for tea, the window was open. Dressed in purple robes, the head of the Zhou family, Zhou Qinyun, had a dark expression. He looked at Gong Yangji sitting across from him. Even the hot tea could not wash away the coldness in his voice. Submitting to the Bazin Kendo ground is the general trend. But even if you flatter him wholeheartedly, you seem to be going too far. Now, He is leaving behind Yantai Guanjian to receive demon consort Zhao. The Qin army has not slowed in their pursuit. At this point, it is hard to say how the battle will turn out, but you sent Gongyang Chuxin to his side. Who does not know that Gongyang Chuxin is your most important grandson? The Gongyang family has spent so much effort on Gongyang Chuxin. This is sending Gongyang Chuxin to his hands as a hostage. Even if the Gongyang family is determined to be tied to the Bazin Kendo ground, why do you have to do this? Gongyang Ji was drinking tea. Hearing Zhou Qinyun's words, he smiled and did not comment. Zhou Qinyun looked down and said in a deep voice, "This is your family's choice. Other families cannot interfere. But your actions will cause everyone to have misgivings. You can even send your most beloved grandson to the other side as a hostage. Then when the battle starts, I fear you will not care about losses when you mobilize the power of the families." Hostage? That is just a difference in thinking. Gongyang Ji could not help but smile and shake his head. Have you ever thought about the rise of the Bazin Kendo ground? Zhou Qinyun frowned. He did not understand the meaning of Gongyang Ji's words. He said calmly, "Naturally, the Bazin Kendo ground was one of the large sects of the Qin dynasty in the past. Their resources were much deeper than any other sect. They had a rich collection of swords and a vast collection of cultivation records. However, those were all dead things. If no one could use them, those dead things would just gather dust and be no different from trash. The Bazin Kendo ground was able to soar because of the sudden appearance of a peerless genius like Wang Jingmeng. Wang Jingmeng had an eidetic memory and immediately understood. Before joining the Bazin Kendo ground, he had a fortuitous encounter and obtained many cultivation records from the remains of the Yu dynasty. After entering the Bazin Kendo ground, he read even more. Then he came to Chongling, and when he fought the Han, Zhao, and Wei dynasties, he learned the cultivation methods of most sections. Such a person's mind is an enormous library. There has never been one in the world of cultivators before, and I fear there will never be one in the future. Many of the powerful cultivators of the Bazin Kendo ground were taught by him to choose suitable methods and sword manuals. That was how they advanced so quickly. After a pause, Gongyang Ji looked at Zhou Qinyun, whose eyes had clearly changed. He said, "It is not an exaggeration to say that he created the Bazin Kendo ground in the past. In my view, since he was able to create the Bazin Kendo ground, even if the present is different from the past, and the Bazin Kendo ground has been destroyed and lost much help, it is not a problem to create half of the Bazin Kendo ground. So this is not a problem of hostages. This is a problem of Gongyang Ji's future. We old people, these pitiful family properties, compared to the future of these juniors, how much is worth cherishing?" When Gongyang Ji's words sounded, Zhou Qinyun's back started to sweat. No matter how high a person's position was, it was easy to be blinded by a single leaf. When he looked from a different angle, the matter was completely different. "I don't know if I'll be able to send Zhou Shi there in time." Zhou Qinyun became anxious. Zhou Shi was his third son, and also the most promising of the young cultivators of the Zhou family to achieve great things. Gongyang Ji smiled. It did not matter to him if they could make it in time. Right now, Gongyang Ji was following Ding Ning. What he was puzzled about was that the fastest way from the Nanquan commanderies to Jiaodong commandery was the water route. But Ding Ning and the others did not seem to have any intentions of taking the water route. So how were they going to travel? A muffled thunder sounded in the clouds. Many black clouds suddenly rose from the distant swamp. The dark clouds contained large amounts of water vapor, as if a storm was about to descend without any warning. However, in the next moment, several enormous shadows flew out from the depths of the swamp, gliding through the air like city walls. The black clouds moved quickly, and the thunder grew louder. Occasionally, enormous claws would pierce through the clouds with powerful energy vibrations. Soaring snakes? Gongyang Ji stilled. After a long time, he could not help but shake his head and grimace. Flying dragons in the sky, this was faster than any horse or boat. But these serpents originally belonged to Jiaodong Commandery, and now they belonged to the Bazin Kendo ground. This was unexpected. This saddle was made with great care. Amidst the black clouds and wind, Ding Ning looked at a young cultivator next to him and said, "This young cultivator had the standard appearance of a Chu person. White skin, an oval face. While he was male, he had the features of a woman, and was not as rough as the Guangzhou Qin people. This young cultivator was naturally Gongyang Ji's hope. He was one of the best of the younger generation of the Gongyang family. At this time, the saddle on the serpents was very quiet. It was not just made from a special kind of soft wood, it was also inlaid with special crystal seal script. Even the sound of the wind was blocked by special energy. Also, the saddle was cushioned with special rattan and soft steel, and there was not much of a jolt. This way, the injured would not feel much discomfort. It is the craftsman's care, and not my work." Hearing Ding Ning's praise, Gongyang Ji only said this. Looking at this humble young man, Ding Ning nodded in thanks, and did not say anything else. "What are you thinking?" His expression was calm, but Zhang Sun Qianxue had been with him for a long time, and could sense that his emotions were different from usual. She asked softly next to him, "I have never been to Jiaodong Commandery." Ding Ning turned his head, looked at her beautiful eyes, and shook his head slightly. He said softly, "One day in the sky, 1 year on the ground." This is how many strange books describe the illusory world of immortals and the passage of time in the mortal world. But the earliest origin comes from the difference between the flying beasts in the sky and the ordinary people walking on the ground. The distance that the soaring serpent flies in a day, many ordinary people would need a year to cross mountains to reach. So even in my mind, Jiaodong Commandery is a very distant place. Now, on this serpent, Jiaodong Commandery seems to be close, like a commandery just a city away. Zhang Sun Qianxue felt the same. This was related to dreams and the distance. When Wang Jingmeng and the people of the Bazin Kendo ground entered Chongling, it seemed to have been yesterday. Many things and places seemed to be very far away, but in the blink of an eye, everything had changed. The difference between dreams and reality was usually deception and betrayal. After the pain, one was no longer a youth. At that time, he had thought that after marrying her, maybe they would go to Jiaodong Commandery to see the sea together. Who would have thought that many years later, he would go to see Jiaodong Commandery that seemed so far away and dreamy? Ding Ning took a deep breath and looked up. He looked out through the cracks in the black clouds at the distant mountains. Suddenly, his gaze landed on a mountain. Then he frowned slightly and seemed to remember something. Chapter 705. We need to go there and take a look. Ding Ning thought for a moment and then said to Qin Yaoyin in the soaring snake saddle. Following the direction Ding Ning was pointing, Qin Yaoyin stilled. "Near Qian Mountain?" he asked Ding Ning uncertainly. That place was not in the Chu or Qin lands. It was not even on their path to Jiaodong Commandery, but in the lands of the Qi dynasty. While they could see it now, it was far away. Going from there to Jiaodong Commandery was not just a waste of time, but because the Qi dynasty and Zheng Xiu were working together, some unexpected accidents might occur. "What is there?" Zhang Sun Qianxue looked at Ding Ning, who had a strange expression, and asked. "There is a sect that uses a kind of seal stone method. They are skilled in using some powder of fire and thunderstones to make seals and attract thunder and fire. But their vital energy method is average, and they rely too much on external items. It is very normal against enemies." Adding on that these seals have a natural counter to Yin energy and ghosts, they are discriminated against in the Qi. Over time, in the eyes of many Qi people, the disciples of this sect are not much different from the Jianghu Taoists who pretend to catch ghosts and exorcise evil. Ding Ning looked at her and explained. "At that time, I was studying the cultivation methods of the dynasties, and coincidentally came into contact with some of the thunder seals of this sect. At that time, I felt that the thunder seals of this sect were very powerful. If there was a powerful vital energy method as a catalyst, the thunder and fire seals they made would be dozens or even hundreds of times stronger. Later on, I really spent some time to comprehend it, and I even found a suitable cultivation method. Hearing this, Zhang Sun Qianxue and Qing Yaoyin, even Gongyang Chuxin, who did not know much about him before, reacted. Back then, while he had found a suitable method for that sect, before he could do anything, Wang Jingmeng encountered the change in Chongling and died in Chongling. Thunder Liquid True Fire Guide, the secret method of the Zhao Fire God Palace. This De Qi sect's method was very strange. Their true essence cultivation method required one to cultivate both thunder and fire. Only a cultivation method that could perfectly transform one's true essence between thunder and fire was suitable. It took me quite a bit of effort to obtain this cultivation technique from the Fire God Palace. After some slight modifications, it should be extremely suitable for the Qi Di sect. However, before I could make contact with the sect, I encountered a huge change. Ding Ning didn't hide anything. As he slowly narrated, his state of mind also completely calmed down. More than 10 years is a long time, especially when I can't do anything during this period. What I'm most worried about is that I'm afraid of some important things. Therefore, I constantly remind myself of some cultivation experiences and mistakes I've made in the past. In this way, when I cultivate again, my realm will become more perfect. Other than that, I also need to remember some important cultivation methods that I have seen before, including the cultivation methods and methods of my opponent. There was a time when I thought Lin Zhujiu and the others were dead. This way, if I want revenge, I can only rely on my cultivation experiences and those powerful sword manuals. Previously, I thought that if I returned to Realm 7, no one in the world could kill me. At least, I could escape if I was not a match. If I could remember these things, I could choose people to teach and rebuild a Bazin Kendo ground. Ding Ning said with a self-mocking smile, but Yuan Wu reached Realm 8. Seeing Yi Zhao's killing formation, it is not so simple. Gongyang Chuxin's hands trembled slightly. While he was the most outstanding person in the younger generation of the Gongyang family, and his intelligence and knowledge were extraordinary, because of Ding Ning's status, each word he said seemed to exceed the world of cultivators, but it was so natural. Now, he understood that with the help of Lin Zhujiu and the others, Ding Ning seemed to carry the secrets of the Bazin Kendo ground and many other cultivation places. It was relatively simple for him to teach. But Ding Ning's calm words contained great ripples that still shocked him. Ding Ning's appearance right now was about the same age as him. But the more time he spent with Ding Ning, the more he ignored these things, and his respect for Ding Ning grew. There was a Taoist temple in the mountain. The Taoist temple was very small and in ruins. While there were flowers and trees, no one was resting, and there was a wild nature to it. There was a plaque above the door of the temple. The paint was mottled, and the original golden characters could not be seen. One had to study it carefully to recognize that it was Thunder Fire Temple. There was only one middle-aged Taoist in the entire temple. This middle-aged Taoist was thin and his complexion was a little yellow. The rough yellow Taoist robe he wore was washed until it was white. It was obvious that although he lived a simple life, it was not easy. However, his expression was dignified. Not only were the tears on his Taoist robe carefully mended, even his body was extremely clean. His hair was not messy at all, and there was no dirt on his fingernails. So even when he was carrying water in front of a well in the temple to do the crude work of watering the vegetable garden, he gave off a reserved feeling. Suddenly, this middle-aged Taoist heard the sound of wind and thunder. He looked up in puzzlement. When he looked up, the entire temple was covered in an enormous shadow. His pupils contracted violently, and his Taoist robes were immediately soaked by water vapor. Sensing the powerful energy vibrations, and looking at the scales that were as thick as rock coming out of the mist, his fingers stiffly released the red seal papers that were starting to heat up in his sleeve. In the next moment, he even relaxed his body and waited silently. I do not know if this is still the sect from back then, and if you know of some of the things that have happened outside recently. If it is someone from that sect, I once wrote a letter here a few months before Yuan Wu of the Qin dynasty ascended the throne. The wind and thunder were still in the sky, but a voice sounded next to him. This middle-aged Taoist instinctively turned his head in the direction of the voice. Just as Ding Ning's figure appeared in his vision, he thought of some astounding things because of the voice. He took a deep breath and bowed deeply without any hesitation. His stiff fingers reached into his sleeves and took out a yellowed cowhide scroll. "If you believe, come to Chongling," Ding Ning said calmly. Those were the last words on this old letter. "My master heard of your death before reaching Chongling. This is the regret of his life." The middle-aged Taoist bowed, his voice trembling. Ding Ning nodded and said, "Since this is the case, I am going to Jiaodong Commandery. You will follow me." The middle-aged Taoist stood and bowed again. His eyes grew wet. He said, "The Qi people believe in ghosts and gods. Allow me to go to my master's memorial tablet to light incense and inform him of this matter." Chapter 706. Smoke rose from the mountains. There was incense burning next to the Yuanwu emperor. But unlike the incense that ordinary people used to calm the mind or offer sacrifices, the incense burning next to Yuanwu was the redwood incense from overseas. Through the baptism and transformation of time, this kind of incense had gathered large amounts of spirit energy that was beneficial to the healing of cultivators. In the world of cultivators, it had become a holy item that could not be bought with money. The redwood burning in Yuanwu's incense burner was as white as jade. It was the best white jade of the white redwood. Even the members of the major families in the world had only seen it in record. In the records, just smelling a wisp of white redwood of this level would make one feel comfortable and ethereal. But in the midst of this fragrance, every few breaths, Yuanwu would cough and spit out some bloody red foam. Su Fu stood silently behind him. The furnishings of this mountain camp were very simple. There were not even many guards and palace attendants in sight. But Su Fu was sure that as long as he stood here, no one in the world could assassinate Yuanwu. But looking at the bloody foam that Yuanwu spat out, his eyes were filled with worry. This white redwood was the best medicine to heal the wounds between the chest and lungs. It could remove the clots in the body that even vital energy could not cleanse. But even a medicine like this had little effect on Yuanwu's wounds. In the view of many people in the world who had not touched cultivation or had just touched cultivation, the higher the cultivation, the stronger the recovery ability. But cultivators like him knew the truth was the opposite. The higher the cultivation, the harder it was for a cultivator to be injured. But once injured, it was much more difficult to recover than ordinary low-level cultivators. Just like how a ball of dirt that was not solid could be easily kneaded back together after it split open, but the hardest gemstones in the world could not be kneaded back together after they split open. The stronger the cultivator, the more they needed astounding amounts of spirit energy to heal the serious wounds in their body. Even if you use all the spirit medicines you collected from overseas, you will not be able to completely remove the hidden wounds in your body. The tearing of the lungs is like exploding lightning. It affects energy the most, and the disharmony of the energies is the most troublesome. If we want to eradicate it, I fear that we will need the spirit lotus seeds that she bathed in Chongling's spirit veins and starlight. Yuanwu looked at the blood on the ground in front of him, but his expression was calm. Hearing his words, Su Fu's furrowed brow suddenly relaxed. But Yuanwu's next words caused his brow to furrow even tighter. But she spent more than 10 years on these spirit lotuses, even at the cost of affecting the advancement of her cultivation, but she never told me the purpose of cultivating these spirit lotuses. If not for Bailey Sushue killing his way into the imperial palace, she would have used these spirit lotus seeds. Even I do not know the use of these spirit lotus seeds. It is unknown if she would be willing to give me these spirit lotus seeds. Su Fu's brows furrowed, but he didn't say anything and just listened in silence. Yuanwu picked up a file and quickly finished reading it. He then picked up another file. In these days, he had stayed here to wait for Ding Ning's messenger to arrive. He healed quietly and did not even leave these tents. But through the files that were quickly delivered to him, he knew the movements of Ding Ning and the others. Many years ago, when I first saw her from Jiaodong Commandery in Chongling, I knew that she was the kind of person who did not want to be under anyone. Wang Jingmeng thought of her too well, so based on this, I won against Wang Jingmeng. I stopped here to wait for Wang Jingmeng's people. She naturally will not be happy. It will be even harder for me to get the spirit lotus seeds. If Jiaodong Commandery is lost, my relationship with her may ease. She knows Wang Jingmeng better than I do. For someone like Wang Jingmeng, after getting Jiaodong Commandery, it is just a matter of time before he creates another Bazin Kendo ground. My relationship with her is not determined by what I have done, or what I have done for her. When she entered Chongling, the moment I saw her, it was decided. It is in her person. Yuanwu finished reading all the files and happened to say this. Then he stood up and turned to look at the silent Su Fu. After saying so much, I just want you to not persuade me not to trade with Wang Jingmeng and the others. Su Fu did not immediately respond. He slowly raised his head and looked at the clouds in the sky. Could it be that many things and people in this world were destined from the very beginning? If she had given the true Jiaodong Commandery to this lonely one, then would I have just barely reached Realm 8 before the Deer Mountain Conference? Yuanwu said with slight disdain. His face was still calm, and there was no change in his expression. However, when he spoke to Su Fu earlier, he had always referred to himself as I, but now, he used this lonely one. This meant that he wasn't just confiding in Su Fu, but also carrying the weight of an imperial order. Su Fu nodded in greeting and said, "Yes?" When he nodded, a strand of condensed energy seeped out of his body, turning into dozens of wisps that scattered into the wind. Many glowing streams of light appeared in the air around the forest, as though many of the light rays had been forcibly twisted. For some people who had come from afar, this was a direction like opening a door. A dark and cold presence quickly swam over from the ground in the distance. 100 steps from Yuanwu, it was stopped by the yang and power Su Fu gave off. Then a ball of black energy appeared without warning. The black energy quickly shrank towards the center, and formed into Qian Mu's figure. "Yan Ying's disciple, you want to kill this lonely one." Yuanwu looked coolly at Qian Mu who was facing him. Looking at Qian Mu's shining black eyes, he shook his head. "But you will never be able to kill this lonely one. Someone will kill you for me." Qian Mu clenched his fists tightly. His fingernails dug into his flesh, but he did not feel pain, just numbness. Strangely, there were no special emotions on his face. He just looked deeply at Yuanwu and said. Yuanwu smiled scornfully. He had no intention of playing house with a child like this. With his hands behind his back, he said, "What did he have you bring me in exchange for eldest Miss Shang?" Qian Mu said simply, "The Wuji Ancestral Mountain's elixir of immortality." When he finished speaking, a black tombstone appeared in the air in front of him, and then glided towards Yuanwu and Su Fu as though weightless. Hearing these simple words, and sensing the energy contained in the tombstone, Yuanwu and Su Fu's expressions changed completely. In the air around the mountain, the roars of countless enormous beasts sounded. Chapter 707. The roaring of the world was only because of the energy reaction under the emotional fluctuations. While Yuanwu was in trouble due to his injuries, He had the presence of having the world under his feet. Qian Mu bowed his head slightly. He knew even more that no matter how much he hated Yuan Wu, he could not win against someone like this. This medicine is very dangerous. Su Fu's fingers moved slightly, as though he had touched the energy in the gravestone. His expression changed. He had been searching for medicines overseas for a long time for Yuan Wu and naturally understood medicine. At this time, while this medicinal energy contained astounding changes in his perception and caused his flesh and blood to feel an eagerness to try, he also sensed that this medicinal energy had a holy and deathly stillness, completely different from the liveliness of the top spirit medicines he had encountered in the world. Yuan Wu nodded, indicating that he had heard clearly. He did not immediately express his stance, just reached out and touched the gravestone. The moment his hand touched the black gravestone, it was immediately filled with blinding golden holy light. The black gravestone gave off hostility as though it was about to explode. But his hand pressed tightly on the black gravestone. The black gravestone was unable to move amidst the vibrations. The golden holy light seeped into the black gravestone. He used a dozen breaths to sense it, and his expression grew stranger. So the so-called Wuji Ancestral Mountain's elixir of immortality is something like this. Then he looked at Qian Mu, as though he already knew Ding Ning's arrangements. He said, "The medicinal power is at most half. The other half is to be returned to Miss Shang and then given to me? The other half is with Fu Su, and will be given to you along with Fu Su." "Really?" Yuan Wu raised an eyebrow. His expression usually did not change much. Many times, other than the majesty of a monarch, he just appeared simple and honest. But when he raised an eyebrow, there was an indescribable pride. Then he said simply, "I agree to this condition." Qian Mu was slightly shocked. He had not expected Yuan Wu to agree so readily. But in the next moment, his heart sank. He felt that this was the presence Yuan Wu should have. Only a person like this could win against the former Wang Jingmeng and the master who had killed him. Such a person seemed to be as simple and unadorned as a rock. Yet, he was very frightening. Yuan Wu did not look at Qian Mu. He did not think about how to exchange for Miss Shang and Fu Su. In his view, these were things that Ding Ning should be thinking about. The eternal and deathly energy in the Wuji Ancestral Mountain's elixir of immortality should have come from beyond the heavens, and contained the scent of eroding one's mind. This kind of medicine that should not belong to this world was what he needed to consider. Burning incense, praying to the Grandmaster, locking the doors and windows. In the Thunder Fire Taoist temple, the middle-aged Taoist took every step very carefully. He knew that if he left today, he might not be able to return for a long time. He might never be able to return. Ding Ning patiently watched him do all this. The middle-aged Taoist's appearance made his eyes shine brighter and brighter, and reminded him more and more of his senior brothers in the back mountain of the Bazin Kendo ground. This was definitely an unexpected surprise. This middle-aged Taoist had the same unique temperament as his senior brothers. "You are the only one left in the Thunder Fire Taoist temple?" After the middle-aged Taoist finished all this, he asked, "What are you called?" "Master gave me the name Shouchen." The middle-aged Taoist said, 5 years after the change in Chongling, the second year after Yuan Wu ascended the throne, plagues broke out in the commanderies around my Thunder Fire Taoist temple. Half of the people in my Thunder Fire Taoist temple were infected and died. The cultivators could not resist the plague. At the time, we were the laughingstock of the Qi. Originally, there were more than a dozen sect brothers left, but they all left. Only I remained. Ding Ning looked at him and said, "Your cultivation is at least realm 5. Naturally, it is not a problem for you to make a living. But I see that your blood and energy are not strong. You do not seem to have enough food. Why is that?" "Some sects have pushed aside my Thunder Fire Taoist temple. My master died in such a matter. If someone in court had not received his favor, this sect would not have been kept. But after my master died, the Thunder Fire Taoist temple did not enjoy the benefits of a cultivation place in the Qi. The taxes on the fields in the mountains were very heavy. The land that this sect occupied seemed to have been rented with a lot of money. This Taoist called Shochin explained, "I tried my best. In the past years, I taught many disciples, but when they had some achievements, they were borrowed by other sections." Ding Ning was silent for a long moment and said, "Why do you still keep that letter? The Thunder Fire Taoist temple is just an ordinary cultivation place. In the beginning, the ancestral master was just a wandering Taoist. Coincidentally, he helped the country gentry here defeat bandits, so he was asked to stay and open this sect. Generation after generation, at most, he helped people with rituals, used energy to heal people, calm their nerves, and remove evil energy. There was nothing glorious worth mentioning. But the once invincible Wang Jingmeng sent a letter, and noticed an insignificant cultivation place like ours. This is true glory. Also, if not for the astounding energy in the words of the letter, my master may have thought it was a prank from another sect." Shochin took a deep breath and looked at Ding Ning. Then he slowly said, "My master said, for this letter, he will pass down this Taoist temple. To be able to guard this Taoist temple like this, your master's greatest glory is not receiving my letter, but choosing a direct disciple like you." Ding Ning looked at him, and was even more certain that he was similar to the senior sect brothers of the Bazin Kendo ground. Shochin did not speak. He reached into his sleeve and took out a jade box, and then opened it. Ding Ning stilled slightly. The jade box that Shochin took out from his sleeve was the best Dushan jade. This kind of jade was naturally warm and had the ability to block energy. Even more importantly, this kind of jade was very expensive, and did not fit in with this dilapidated Taoist temple. The jade box had 5 layers. When Shochin opened it, Ding Ning saw 5 Taoist seals, each different. The Taoist seals of the Thunder Fire Taoist temple were, in the truest sense, the oldest Taoist seals in the world of cultivators. The seals themselves were made from special materials, and the seals were drawn using special metals or jade powders mixed with other treasures that could gather large amounts of primal energies of the universe. The power of these Taoist seals came mostly from the seals themselves. The vital energy of the cultivators and their unique methods of making seals were equivalent to lighting these seal candles. The greatest disadvantage of a legacy like the Thunder Fire Taoist temple was that these Taoist seals would often be killed by flying swords before they could be used. So in the world of cultivators, it evolved into Celestial Seal Sect's method of forming seals with vital energy. But at this time, even though these 5 Taoist seals were in the jade box that blocked energy, in Ding Ning's eyes, they shone brightly and shocked him. Chapter 708. Shochin knew very well why Ding Ning was shocked at this moment. He held the jade box as if he was holding the entire weight of the sect, so he spoke even more slowly. "Just as you know, the Seal Dao of my Thunder Fire Taoist temple is different from other Seal Dao sections. We mainly rely on external materials. However, the Seal Dao of my sect is superior to other sections. For example, some materials that are useless to other sects, some crystal powder that cannot be used to create artifacts, some bones of ancient spirit beasts, and even some resin condensed from enormous spirit trees can be used to create seals. However, while these different materials can be used as primers to gather large amounts of primal energies of the world, according to our Thunder Fire Taoist temple's Seal Dao, the different materials have to go through countless trials and deliberations, and the success rate is extremely low. In the eyes of my sect, there are some important materials that are regarded as treasures, but in the eyes of many other sects, they are worthless trash. Previously, my sect's storehouse had accumulated a lot of these materials, but because the success rate was extremely low, coupled with the fact that our ancestral masters didn't pay much attention to them, they were limited by their true essence cultivation methods and talisman casting method. No matter how powerful a talisman was, it wouldn't be able to increase its power by much, so why would they pursue the best materials to make the best talisman? Before receiving your letter, all of the ancestral masters thought so. This is a problem of perception. Our Thunder Fire Taoist temple had many ancestral masters who wanted to find vital energy cultivation methods that could complement our talisman Tao. Unfortunately, our Taoist temple did not come into contact with so many cultivation methods, and we have never had someone like you who could see almost all the cultivation methods in the world. So later on, our perception was that there could not be a cultivation method more suitable for our talisman Tao. At this point, Shochin was silent for a long time. Then he slowly said, "But your letter changed everything. My master heard the news of the Bazin Kendo ground's destruction before he reached Chongling, but when he returned to the temple, he spent all of his time making seals. Even if he could not find a better method in his life, and even if he found one, he did not know how to merge it. But in his view, since this existed, he had to leave something useful for the Thunder Fire Temple. So he left behind 2 seals. I've made 3, but that doesn't mean that I'm better than my master. Many of my methods are based on my master's research." Ding Ning's gaze left the talismans. He looked up at the humble Taoist and nodded. "These 5 talismans are enough to bring glory to the Thunder Fire Taoist temple." As Shochin closed the jade box, he inexplicably thought of the story where this Ding Ning had taken Shui Wangshu to participate in the Min Mountain sword trials. After that, White Goat Cave became famous throughout the world. Shochin knew that he didn't need such glory, but his sect did. So he bowed deeply to Ding Ning again and said, "I will not doubt your words because you have brought glory to Thunder Fire Temple by coming here on the dragon." The soaring serpent was still circling in the air, the black clouds twisting into all kinds of strange shapes. Just like Shochin said, almost everyone knew that Ding Ning was going to Jiaodong Commandery. Yet today, he had entered the Qi border, and especially come to Thunder Fire Temple. This caused countless people to be shocked and speculate. What was in that temple? In the cities closest to the mountain, all the Qi soldiers were on high alert. In one of the cities, Tian Yuza, one of the famous generals of the Qi dynasty, looked with a grave expression at the mountain shrouded in black clouds. Under the secret orders of the Qi emperor, the Qi dynasty and Zheng Xiu had worked together. Many powerful cultivators had added Yin energy formations to the nether float. This caused discontent in the dynasty, especially when the Qi army took the chance to invade the Chu lands. Many old generals and cultivators who had fought with the Chu against the Qin army expressed their discontent and anger at the Qi emperor by disarming and returning home. With the support of some Yus, and the benefits of taking the Chu lands back to the Qi dynasty, the situation of the Qi dynasty stabilized. Yet as the attack on the 9-Death Silkworm failed, Yuan Wu confirmed that the reborn 9-Death Silkworm had appeared in the Nanquan commanderies. Min Mountain Sword sect had broken off relations with Chongling, Yen Ying's disciple was with Ding Ning and the others. When these news spread to the Qi lands, the voices of unease and opposition to the Qi emperor immediately spread and could not be stopped. Even in the eyes of a famous general like him, who focused on the big picture, the Qi dynasty was in a dangerous situation. They had turned against the Bazin Kendo ground. If Consort Zhao led the hundreds of thousands of Chu troops into Jiaodong Commandery, then it would not just be the Jing family that would be defeated by the Bazin Kendo ground, but all of Jiaodong Commandery would be taken over by the Bazin Kendo ground. From a strategic point of view, the Qi dynasty would be attacked from 3 sides by the Qin, Yan and Jiaodong Commandery. The Yan dynasty had made their stance clear. They would be on the same side as the Bazin Kendo ground. If the Qin changed their minds, then the Qi dynasty would be isolated and helpless, and would be easily destroyed. As an important general of the dynasty, he would not criticize what had already happened, but had to consider how to avoid such an unfavorable situation. Like the Yen dynasty, to express goodwill to the Bazin Kendo ground? It was not just the Qi Emperor who would not do this. Now, Ding Ning had entered the Qi lands, but had not made any contact with them. This meant that the Qi dynasty was an enemy in the eyes of the Bazin Kendo ground. Betrayal is the greatest crime for an ally. Once a mistake like this is made, even if you turn around and pay a price, you cannot regain the original trust. A voice rang out behind Tianyuza. The one who spoke was also one of the famous generals of the Qi dynasty, the commander of the Ghost Army, one of the 3 strongest armies of the Qi dynasty, Lan Linxing. He clearly had the same opinion as Tianyuza. Then he said in a cold voice, "The other has come to the Qi but has not made contact with us. This means that they view the Qi dynasty as an enemy. To avoid being attacked from 3 sides in the future, it is best for us to urge His Majesty to send out troops to stop them, and not let the Bazin Kendo ground and the Chu army take over Jiaodong Commandery. His Majesty is not stupid, but I do not understand why he has not acted." Tianyuza nodded and turned to look at Lan Linxing. He said, "But the Bazin Kendo ground people have specially come here as though they are not worried that the Qi dynasty will send out troops. I do not know what they plan to do, and what other moves they have." Lan Linxing was silent for a moment. Then he said softly and coldly, "When the Qin was fighting the Han, Zhao, and Wei, I had helped the Wei and interacted with the Bazin Kendo ground people. Wang Jingmeng and Lin Zhuzhou working together, one in charge of war, the other in charge of the details, is terrifying." Chapter 709. Tianyuza also grew silent. Wang Jingmeng and Lin Zhuzhou, this was undoubtedly the strongest and most legendary pair in the history of war in the past hundreds of years. The Han, Zhao, and Wei dynasties, other than the Han dynasty itself being in a state of chaos and going downhill, the Zhao and Wei dynasties were unusually strong. But in just a dozen years, these 3 dynasties were swallowed up by the Qin dynasty. In those wars, no matter if it was a conspiracy or an open one, Wang Jingmeng and Lin Zhuzhou were mostly involved. At that time, Yuan Wu was even ignored because this pair far surpassed all the famed generals of the time. Not just on the level of military matters, Lin Zhuzhou's ability and meticulousness covered many other areas. He had close connections with many sects of the time, and even sects of other dynasties. At that time, Wang Jingmeng was said to have read all the cultivation manuals. At least half of the manuals were secret scrolls that cultivation places did not share. But these secret scrolls were able to reach Wang Jingmeng's hands because of Lin Zhuzhou. Back then, all the generals of the Qin dynasty called Lin Zhuzhou military advisor. But Lin Zhuzhou's prestige and use back then was not just a military advisor. Based on reliable military intelligence, Lin Zhuzhou had reached Jiaodong Commandery. Right now, Ding Ning was going to Jiaodong Commandery on the Dragon. This terrifying pair would meet again many years later. This was the most worrisome matter. Many years later, maybe Lin Zhuzhou would be forgotten and ignored, but for generals like them, he could not be ignored. To the east of the outer sea of Jiaodong Commandery, within a dozen days to a month's journey, there were many islands with small countries on them. Some of the seas between these countries had once been the territory of some enormous sea beast. Jiaodong Commandery spent thousands of years to kill most of the sea beasts, and successfully tame some of the sea beasts like the soaring serpent. Especially after killing the mirages in the abyss at the bottom of the sea, these seas could be used for navigation, and some seas would not become grotesque because of the energy of these enormous beasts. But in the seas of Jiaodong Commandery, from the east to the north, there were many areas where cultivators rarely traveled. Even the Qin dynasty, who explored the seas the most, only had a general map of these places, and could not even clearly mark how many islands there were. There were not just powerful sea beasts in these seas, there were also the cold winds and currents from the land of eternal ice in the north. The cold winds could easily cause unpredictable storms, and when the cold currents and warm currents met, the water currents under the sea would be turbulent and unpredictable. But who would have thought that the ancestors of Jiaodong Commandery had grasped some of the laws of the water? Who would have thought that the foundation of Jiaodong Commandery's 1,000 years was hidden in the depths of these seas? Lin Zhujiu was in these seas right now. Of Jiao Commandery, Jiao was the Jiao of Jiao Jiaodong. This kind of ship was the snail ship made by the ancestors of Jiaodong Commandery. When encountering any kind of sway, the cultivator on the ship only needed to use a bit of strength to firmly control the center of gravity of the ship, and it would be difficult to capsize in a storm. As long as they could keep a certain amount of fresh water and food on the ship, and even some of the medicines cultivators needed, they could survive and sail in these seas for a long time. But clearly, without the top-secret sea map of Jiaodong Commandery, almost no cultivator in the world could get close to the true foundation of Jiaodong Commandery. Because the ancestors of Jiaodong Commandery had spent hundreds of years, some of the already powerful and vicious sea beasts in these seas had become even more vicious, and even used seal weapons to make many dangerous traps under the sea. Many of the things that were truly hard to get close were because of people. In front of Lin Zhujiu, there was an area shrouded in white mist. The snail ship he and Zhang Shiwu were on was not deliberately controlled, and just floated with the natural currents. The white mist moved with the currents but did not dissipate. Inside the white mist there was an enormous shadow. Under the sunlight, one could vaguely see that it was a piece of land. That piece of land was at least the size of an ordinary city in the world. But the white mist was moving, and it was always at the center of the white mist. This meant that this piece of land was also floating. As the strategist of the Qin dynasty, whose prestige had surpassed Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiu, Lin Zhujiu had seen countless fantastical things in his life. But when he looked at this piece of land, his eyes were still filled with shock and emotion. He could not help but say to Zhang Shiwu next to him, "If I did not see it with my own eyes, who would have thought that the true Jiaodong Commandery is a floating piece of land like this, a city that moves with the currents?" Zhang Shiwu grimaced. He was also in a state of indescribable shock. On that floating piece of land, he saw the outlines of some enormous buildings. He could not help but think, no wonder Zheng Xiu, a woman from Jiaodong Commandery, had such great ambition when she entered Chongling. He did not speak, but his breathing was heavy. When Lin Zhujiu spoke, he did not use vital energy. His voice was not loud, and could not travel far on the surface of the sea. But at this time, on the miraculous floating piece of land in the white mist, a terrifying presence suddenly exploded. As this terrifying presence exploded, hundreds of thousands of whirlpools appeared on the calm surface of the sea. The ship Lin Zhujiu and Zhang Shiwu were on was thrown high into the air by the wave. At the same time, countless fish that had not felt any danger jumped out of the sea in shock. The fish in the deep sea shone with all kinds of colors, like countless gems flying out of the sea and exposed to the sunlight. But in the next moment, they were torn apart by a vast and violent presence, turning into a rain of blood and bone fragments that blew towards Lin Zhujiu and Zhang Shiwu. Zhang Shiwu's expression did not change at all. He just pressed down with his hands, and stabilized the ship thrown into the air by the wave. Lin Zhujiu's brow furrowed slightly, and a strange expression appeared on his face. He took a deep breath, and was certain he smelled that familiar scent. Then he could not help but shake his head. "I had not expected this thing to grow." Zhang Shiwu slowly channeled his vital energy, and had the ship retreat along the waves until it left the area covered by the presence. Then he looked at Lin Zhujiu. "I fear we cannot force our way in." Lin Zhujiu naturally saw his meaning. He shook his head and said, "Wait for him to come." Zhang Shiwu's tense shoulders relaxed slightly. He said, "I am just worried that you have soaked in the water for so many years. If you stay on the water now, you will want to vomit. You finally know how to tell a joke. Lin Zhujiu laughed and said, "That is river water, this is sea water. One is light, one is salty. It is refreshing." Chapter 710. Zhang Shiwu grinned. While he could not help but laugh, he felt this was not a joke. No matter who it was, after being imprisoned in a dark water prison for many years, and struggling at death's door while smelling the rotting smell of their own body, they would find it fresh if they smelled something different. He knew that Lin Zhujiu was able to endure such a life because of strong hatred. People could tolerate a certain level of betrayal, but how could they accept the betrayal of the people they spent time with? So many people who could laugh together and go through life and death together had died in such a betrayal. Tianping Commandery was the commandery closest to Nanquan Commandery in the Chu dynasty. At this time, it was the focus of everyone's attention, because the majority of the remnant army of the Chu dynasty was fighting with the Qin army on the plains. Unlike cultivators, the retreat of an army involved more details. Some refugees and wounded soldiers along the way had to be settled down. The armies had to restrain and defend each other. Some defended, some retreated. If there was a problem, it would lead to astounding numbers of deaths and injuries. Cultivators would only need a day and night to pass through a commandery, but large numbers of troops would need several times or even dozens of times the time to retreat. Although it was said to be the remnant army, in reality, after retreating from Yangshan Commandery, the hundreds of thousands of Chu soldiers had split into hundreds of groups. Some had different missions along the way, and some had been scattered by the Qin army. Some Chu soldiers had lost contact with other Chu soldiers. Because they were too far away, they could not even see the smoke signals of the main army retreating to Nanquan Commandery. They relied on their soldiers' instincts to fight on this land. Most of the Chu army had lost their supplies a dozen days ago. Even the horses and beasts were not as tenacious as these soldiers. After a long time of insufficient supplies and arduous travel, most of the horses and beasts had died, and were used as food by the army. Many places where the army passed, even the grass was almost gone. This was not because of trampling, but because the grass roots and tree barks were used as food. Because of the heat and humidity, the skin of the soldiers who had fought off a wave of plague not long ago started to fester. Many people's toes were stuck together, and their stomachs were swollen from eating food that was hard to digest. Because of the lack of medicine, many people even died from intestinal obstruction due to being unable to defecate. Yet such a situation was not unique to the Chu army. As they went deeper into the Chu territory, it meant that they were getting further and further away from familiar battlefield. Other than fighting the Chu army, more and more resistance forces were joining along the way. Some came from the voluntary organizations of the villages, some came from the armies coming from afar, some came from the private armies of the powerful families, and even some bandits and bandits who were enemies of the court joined the battle. However, this was not the most important thing. As the pursuer, the Qin army did not have a fortress most of the time, and could not wait for the enemy to be exhausted. They did not have the advantage of terrain. Furthermore, because the orders from above were getting harsher and harsher, the army was forced to chase faster and faster. In terms of supply, the Qin army had already lost their advantage. They passed through many barren lands that the Chu army had passed through. Even some of the water sources had been poisoned. Along the way, in order to help the Chu army fend off their pursuit, some villagers even burned down their own villages, leaving only a limited amount of food. The rest of the food was given to the Chu army, and these villagers all hid in the forests they were familiar with. At this time, in a village that had been burned to the ground, there were pieces of cloth cut from tents on the ground. There were thousands of these pieces of cloth that filled the empty spaces of the village. Each piece of cloth had a wounded Qin soldier lying on it. There were only a dozen or so doctors wandering among the wounded. However, these doctors didn't have any medicine left on them, The only things they had were some clean cotton cloths and clean water. The uncontrollable groans of pain formed a sea of sorrow and despair. This army was the Tsangnan army, an army under Wei Wujiu's command. At this time, the highest-ranking generals of the army were Zhang Tu and Tian Rong. Zhang Tu was a famous brawny man among Wei Wujiu's subordinates. His body was abnormally tall and sturdy, like a giant when he stood. However, right now, he was sitting silently under the thickest camphor tree in the village. His body was thin. Even though he wore armor, he gave off the feeling that he was as thin as paper. Even his cheekbones were high because he was too thin. This camphor tree was extremely thick. Most of its branches and leaves had been burned away in the flames, but because it was close to the stream, it was still tenaciously alive. Under the midday sun at the end of summer, those pitch-black branches still gave this general a shade. Zhang Tu held a stone bowl in his hand. The bowl was filled with sticky millet soup. This was the best food this army could have. Twice, he brought the bowl to his mouth but put it down again. It was not that the food was hard to swallow, but the wails of pain that made him uneasy. "Do you still have to carry out orders?" Tian Rong saw him put down the stone bowl for the second time, and finally could not help but speak. He came from Chongling, and was handsome to begin with. He was considered a pretty man in the army. But in the battle a few days ago, some of his scalp had been cut off by flying sword. At this time, the bandaged cloth had purple-black dried blood that covered half of his face. He did not look like a handsome Qin general, but a vicious and desperate bandit leader. Our daily casualties are more than double the Chu armies. If we go forward, I fear that in just a few days, not many of us will be able to stand. Tian Rong took a deep breath. His expression was slightly twisted, but he lowered his voice. We have already left behind 2 batches of wounded, and there is nothing left to lose. I do not fear death, but you should know why we are in such a hurry to chase. We just have to do our best to destroy the Chu army, and not let them enter Jiaodong Commandery. To protect Jiaodong Commandery, sacrificing the lives of so many brothers may be worth it in her view, but I will not accept it. We have done our best, and to these Chu soldiers they have hope. They will soon be received by the Nanquan commanderies, but our subordinates have no hope. I can accept a military order to die, but I cannot accept a military order that makes them despair because of someone's whispers. In the end, Tian Rong looked up at Zhang Tu and said seriously, "If someone has to bear the crime of disobeying a military order, then I will bear it." Zhang Tu suddenly laughed. He laughed so hard his body started to tremble, and the millet soup in his hand fell to the ground. Tian Rong had never seen him react like this, and stilled. "How many years have we lived and died together in the border army?" Zhang Tu bowed his head slightly. His face was full of shadows, but he had a cold pride. "Since I have done my best, do I not dare to disobey orders? I do not believe the others do not dare to disobey orders." Chapter 7:11. A goshawk was flying among the white clouds. On the mountain under the white clouds, the Yuanwu Emperor looked up. With a glance, the goshawk's vitality suddenly disappeared. A faint thread of holy light fell to the side of the Yuanwu Emperor's tent. A guard silently picked up this goshawk that had just been killed and handed it to the attendant in charge of food and lodging. Soon, the goshawk's meat was minced and turned into broth in the pot. The meat of the goshawk was too old and coarse, and not delicious. But the Yuanwu Emperor did not usually care about taste. Even more importantly, he would not allow living beings to fly above his head. When the steam mixed with the fragrance of wild vegetables started to rise from the pot, the Yuanwu Emperor put down the scrolls in his hand, and stood up. He looked down at the surrounding lands. From time to time, attendants would bring in scrolls from all over the place. While this was a desolate border because of his existence, it seemed to have become the center of the Qin dynasty. The most important thing for a person was to be able to see themselves clearly other than others. From the start of his cultivation to reaching Realm 8, he had seen countless powerful cultivators and geniuses. He knew that compared to those geniuses, if there was something special about him, it was that he was focused, serious, and down-to-earth in everything he did. He was like this in cultivation, in using soldiers, and in governing. Do you know? What I despise the most about you is that your talent is too strong. Ruling a country and pacifying the world is originally a very artistic thing. However, because your cultivation is too high, it has become a crude thing that can be decided by purely relying on martial strength. The existence of a person like you is the greatest threat. Even if you led the army to defeat the Han, Zhao, and Wei dynasties, the Qin dynasty has become a dynasty that only knows martial strength. Even more importantly, you are not part of the imperial house. In the end, the fanatical worship of you will not affect the imperial house. How can the imperial house rule? So you have to die. He said these words to his old friend in his mind. Then he had his attendant bring in hot tea and some washed wild fruit. Because he had already sensed that the other half of the exchange, his son Fu Su, was about to arrive. The silence of the wilderness at the foot of the mountain was shattered by the sound of horse hooves. A group of soldiers escorting a carriage came closer and closer to the foot of the mountain. Su Fu also appeared behind him. Looking at Prince Fu Su, who finally appeared in his line of sight, he remained silent. At almost the same time, on the dark side of Wu Mountain, a seemingly ordinary merchant ship was slowly moving along a river that led to the interior of the Qin. However, this ship had many formations that blocked the primal energies of the universe. Naturally, it was to hide the presence of some special powerful cultivators. Of course, it was not an ordinary ship. In a quiet room, a man in a black robe, who had many white bone ornaments hanging on his body, slowly opened his eyes. When he opened his eyes, many of the runes in this quiet room reacted naturally, and a lot of black gas spread out like vines. This black-robed man was Qi Siren, one of the grandmasters with the highest cultivation and prestige in the Qi dynasty. After he opened his eyes, he shook his head. A disdainful smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. Then he naturally stood up and walked out of this quiet room. His actions caused the expressions of several cultivators on the same boat to change. Because the instant he walked out of the cabin and onto the deck, in the river water outside the ship, countless black gas spread out like the tentacles of a giant octopus. Meanwhile, his figure became fainter and fainter, as if he was about to merge into a certain black gas and then disappear. You are? A cultivator dressed in yellow robes could not help but ask in shock. This should be because you have not settled your own family matters. You have caused me to waste so much effort. Qi Siren said coldly. The last thing his body left in this cultivator's eyes was an exploding black flame. When Qi Siren's body disappeared, this yellow-robed cultivator's great shock and confusion only lasted for a few breaths. The sky suddenly brightened, and even drove away the remaining blackness in the river. A bright sword light seemed to pierce the sky and fly down from the sky. It could not even be described as a meteor because the speed of this sword light was faster than a meteor. There was only one person in the world who could be so fast. The word kill was swallowed by this yellow-robed cultivator's throat. He knew that if he really gave the order to kill Miss Shang in the cabin, then when he gave the order, he would have been killed by Tantai Guanjian. Also, the cultivators in the cabin would not be able to kill Miss Shang in time. Qi Siren had helped them escort Miss Shang. This was a top secret among top secret. Even the Qin dynasty's military did not know. Especially when only the Yuanwu emperor and the empress knew the exact transportation route. So Tantai Guanjian's appearance here was just as Qi Siren had said. It could only be that something had happened between the two of them. It was a family matter. It was also at this moment that a strange vibration came from the bottom of the merchant ship. The merchant ship that had been swiftly moving in the river suddenly ran aground. This wasn't an area full of reef. However, there were countless tombstones of various sizes, carrying a powerful aura of hatred and gloomy coldness. They floated up from the bottom of the water, easily lifting up this merchant ship and stopping it. Father. Fu Su walked to the end of the mountain path. Looking at the man waiting for him in front of the tent, he bowed deeply. The reunion of father and son was an exciting moment. But inexplicably, after Fu Su shouted these two words, his heart hurt slightly. His body seemed to grow heavier, so heavy he could not stand up. Yuanwu waited silently for Fu Su to stand up. He waved his hand. Other than him, Su Fu and Fu Su, everyone else on the mountain peak dispersed. The mountain wind blew through the tent, causing it to flutter. Even his calm voice sounded a little empty. I know you have something to say. Father, you cannot accept this Wuji ancestral mountain's elixir of immortality. This is a scheme to drive a wedge between you and Mother. Fu Su used all his strength to finally look up and say to his determined face, Then what should I do? Yuanwu smiled faintly. Not release Miss Shang and refuse the suggestion? Putting aside the elixir itself, do you want Miss Shang to die, or do you want yourself to die? Fu Su was stunned. He opened his mouth slightly and could not speak. Yuanwu did not speak and just looked silently at him. He will not kill me. After a long time, Fu Su honestly said the answer to the question itself. Of course I do not want Miss Shang to die. Yuanwu laughed again and shook his head. You have to understand, from the moment you were born in the imperial family, you were not an ordinary person. Ordinary people think about what to eat today and what to wear tomorrow. But the people of the imperial family think about the world, and not the life and death of some people. Chapter 7:12. To put it simply, what you need to consider first is the Qin dynasty. The Yuanwu emperor put away his smile and looked at Fu Su. He said slowly and coldly, for the strength and prosperity of this dynasty, you must give up on many personal feelings. You must understand, even if there is a day when you must kill me to make this dynasty stronger, for this dynasty you must kill me. Looking at Fu Su, whose eyes were filled with more pain, he paused and then said in an even slower and stronger tone, I know that you have been in contact with that person for a long time, and there will naturally be hesitation that you should not have. But as the crown prince, you should think clearly. Even what I did to the Bazin Kendo ground in the past was not betrayal to the imperial house and this dynasty, but my destiny. For some reason, Fu Su was in so much pain that he could not breathe. He looked at his respected father and said in a trembling voice, So imperial father can sacrifice me, and even kill mother for this dynasty? Yuanwu looked up at the flowing clouds in the sky. After a moment of silence, he said, At least before this, your mother's existence and actions were of great help to the Qin dynasty. Many times we consider the same things. I hope that in the future she will be like me, and do everything for the prosperity of the Qin dynasty. Fu Su did not hear the most direct response, but he had gotten the answer from Yuanwu's words. Each person had their own reason for existence, and what they thought was right. Especially since Yuanwu was his father, and had become a wise ruler revered by the people of the Qin dynasty. He had achieved things that none of the previous rulers of the Qin dynasty could reach. So he could not speak, and did not have the right to argue. Was this really right? If he could not even protect his family and friends, and could be sacrificed, then what kind of cold world would the dynasty be under the rule of such a person? However, such a voice kept echoing in his heart. I do not like this. After an unknown period of time, the pale-faced Fu Su looked up at Yuanwu and said, I do not like to become a person like this. I do not wish to see you and Mother become enemies. Even if there comes a day when I have to kill you for the sake of the prosperity of the dynasty, I can't sacrifice you in exchange for such a fruit. Therefore, I'm afraid I can't become the crown prince of the Qin dynasty that you hope for." The Yuanwu emperor's expression remained calm. There was no trace of anger on his face. Instead, his gaze became even gentler. "You've changed a lot and matured a lot. Otherwise, even if you were against it to a certain extent, you wouldn't have had the courage to say such things to me. It takes a long time for a person to grow. I will give you enough time." After saying this, the Yuanwu emperor closed his eyes in exhaustion. However, his energy sea suddenly roared like a new world was shaking. A holy light that was thicker than the mountain peak broke through the clouds, as if it was shining down from another world. This holy light surged into Fu Su's body from all directions like a flood, forcing out a strange power from the depths of his body. Yuanwu's features showed disgust. This golden and holy light finally condensed into a ball of light the size of a fist. And at the center of this ball of light, a milky white true essence twisted, like a fat silkworm about to spin silk. And within the silkworm's body, a black crystal floated up and down like waves, rippling with an even more heart-palpitating aura of eternity. A light wind blew through the wormwood on the gray eaves. When a letter reached the mistress of the Chongling Imperial Palace after being sent multiple times, Chongling was once again at night. The withered wormwood moved in the night. There seemed to be gentle water flowing at the edges of the grass in absolute silence. Yet when the mistress of the imperial palace opened the letter and read the contents, the withered wormwood suddenly stiffened, snapped by an inexplicable power, and flew out of the imperial palace. After more than a decade of training, Chongling and the Qin dynasty under Chongling were like extremely efficient seal weapons. They could perfectly carry the cultivator's will, and the actions at each step were swift and effective. The Emperor's study and palace had been damaged in the battle when Bailey Sushua and the Nether Dragon descended. But now they had been completely rebuilt. Other than the feeling of being brand new, there were no signs of battle. However, the courtyard used to reflect starlight could not be rebuilt due to a lack of materials. The spirit spring she often stayed in had completely dried up. It only attracted ordinary spring water, and planted some different-colored lotus flowers. There was no feeling of immortal energy. Moonlight shone down from the ceiling of the newly built study. After being strengthened by some gemstones, it shone brightly on her desk, and on the letter she was reading. It illuminated her fingers until they were as white as the best porcelain in the world. This letter gathered many of the fastest military reports from the Qin and Chu border, and was several hours faster than the warden's office's fastest military report. The things that came from the Jiaodong Commandery's secret network were almost all important matters. But in the end, the rest of the words were naturally ignored and faded in her eyes. Only two pieces of information remained in her eyes for a long time. One was that Wei Wujiu's Tsangnan army had disobeyed orders and stopped chasing the Chu army. Then, most of the other armies in charge of chasing had stopped. This was almost the entire Qin dynasty army going against her will. This way, even if the Qin troops from the nether floats who had traveled night and day from the Chu capital to the Nanquan forts could arrive according to her plan, they could not completely defeat the Nanquan forts and stop the Chu army from breaking through. The hundreds of thousands of Chu soldiers would get a chance to breathe and enter Jiaodong Commandery. The second thing was that the cultivators escorting Miss Shang had been defeated, and Miss Shang had been rescued. Other than Yuanwu, no one could be sure of Miss Shang's location. The reason for this matter came from the deal between Ding Ning and Yuanwu. Empress Jingxiu slowly looked up. The moonlight shone in front of her. The letter in his hand also shattered like a withered leaf and flew forward. What did he promise you? What did he give you that you would not hesitate to do such a thing? She took a deep breath and looked at her porcelain-like fingers that didn't grab anything. she said slowly and coldly, is everything just a deal? Chapter 713. On the other side of the Chongling Imperial Palace, Hu Hai woke up from a nightmare. The mattress under him was completely soaked in his cold sweat. In his nightmare, his skin and flesh had melted onto the mattress. The feeling in his dream was very similar to the sticky feeling he was experiencing now. What surprised him was not just the indescribable terror, but also the extremely soft sounds and coldness. The sound was the sound of the grass on the eaves breaking. The coldness came from the starlight moving through the night. This was a scent he was familiar with since childhood. For some reason, he felt from childhood that his mother did not like him. Her preference for Fu Su was not shown on the surface, but her gaze and even her back when she turned caused him to feel this coldness. He could not understand why there was such a terrifying coldness. Even if his cultivation talent was slightly lacking compared to Fu Su, were they not both her sons? Why was there such a difference? Tonight, the coldness was exceptionally clear. After he woke up from the nightmare, he did not dare to move on the sticky bed. These soft sounds were like the hissing of a poisonous snake. He could not help but think of that dark underground where Shun Xian had pierced his skin with hollow needles. The sound of blood spraying out of the needles was like this. This soft sound was especially clear in the absolute silence. The blood turned into red mist and shrouded him. The sound lasted for a long time, but the loss of blood in his body was not great. It would only make people feel weak and helpless. Of course, there was also the accumulation of extreme terror. Hu Hai's body started to convulse. His body convulsed on the sticky mattress, and even jump. There were muffled sounds on the sturdy mattress, and in the empty imperial palace, it became a heart-shaking noise. Panicked footsteps and shouts sounded. A doctor quickly rushed to his side. This doctor, who was also a powerful cultivator, used his vital energy to send many medicinal liquids that could stop the body from convulsing and calm the soul into Hu Hai's body. Then the doctor quickly and skillfully took out many golden needles, stabbing them into some of Hu Hai's meridian points where his energies were surging. This kind of imperial doctor had great skills, but what made his expression ugly was that, just like the previous times, he could not resolve Hu Hai's symptoms. Hu Hai's convulsions were like a real nightmare that could not be shaken off. In the next few breaths of time, he had no choice but to slap Hu Hai's lungs with both hands, using his own energy to maintain the functions of Hu Hai's internal organs, so that Hu Hai would not be unable to breathe during the violent convulsions, or even have serious problems with his internal organs. The palpitating sound of his body crashing against the bed continued for a long time. The doctor's clothes were completely soaked. When the situation was completely stabilized, the doctor walked out of Hu Hai's bedroom. Under the bright moonlight, his face was a bit ashen. He said to his colleagues and disciples who were waiting for him in a line, "We have to find a way to cure him completely, or find someone who can cure him better than us. Otherwise, if this continues, it won't be a psychological problem anymore. His entire body will be completely crippled." In the dark night, the mottled soul-suppressing nail slowly withdrew from Miss Shang's qi. Qian Mu's fingers had a black energy flow connected to this soul-suppressing nail. This scene gave people the feeling that his fingers had melted and connected to this soul-suppressing nail. His cultivation came from his most respected master, Yan Ying. As a result, he took shortcuts in the previous realms and was unable to understand the minute changes in each realm. Therefore, he should stay at Realm 7 for the rest of his life and never be able to break through to Realm 8. But because he had perfectly inherited Yan Ying's life bond item, and had powerful methods that other people could not understand, he was almost invincible among Realm 7 Grandmasters. But this soul-suppressing nail was the ultimate treasure of the Qi dynasty. For all cultivators who cultivated Yin and Ghost methods, it was a divine item with extremely powerful energy. So even for him, the process of removing this soul-suppressing nail was much more difficult than fighting multiple realm sevens at the same time. After Yen Ying's death, Qi Siren should have been one of the strongest cultivators of the Qi dynasty. He should have had the confidence to face an opponent like Yantai Guanjian. Even if he could not win, he likely had the ability to protect himself. But he could not survive under the combined efforts of Yantai Guanjian and Qian Mu. So when he sensed the presence of Yantai Guanjian and Qian Mu, he decisively abandoned Miss Shang and left. He did not even have the time to kill Miss Shang and take away this soul-suppressing nail. The soul-suppressing nail was a holy item used by the Qi imperial family to intimidate the sections. It was an important weapon of the country. So when Qi Siren fled, when he faced Jing Xiu's subordinates, he appeared so cold and angry. Yuan Wu and Jing Xiu had problems. This was a family matter of the Qin dynasty. But in this change, the one who had suffered the greatest loss was the Qi dynasty. As time slowly passed, when Qian Mu finally pulled out this soul-suppressing nail, he grew weak and trembled all over. Many thanks. Miss Shang bowed seriously in thanks. The old servant who had been following her bowed deeply to him. You can forge this soul-suppressing nail into your lifebond item. Qian Mu knew that her lifebond item had been destroyed in the battle against Qi Siren, so he immediately suggested. Miss Shang needed such a powerful lifebond item, and she knew that Qian Mu did not need such a lifebond item. So she did not refuse and took this holy item from Qian Mu's trembling hands. Li Yunrui and Bai Shanshui, the husband and wife, are they really going to rob the 12 shaman gods? She asked worriedly. There was no need to say how powerful Bai Shanshui and Li Yunrui were when they worked together. But the Qi dynasty was the dynasty with the most realm 7 grandmasters. The ghostly methods of grandmasters like Qi Siren were not something ordinary cultivators could deal with. In her mind, she did not think that just Bai Shanshui and the others could stop the Qi emperor from using the 12 shamans. Ding Ning says it is possible because we only need to destroy it and not obtain it, Qian Mu said quickly. Qian Mu quickly answered. Also, he said that what he thought clearly, Bai Shanshui would think clearly as well. So Bai Shanshui said to leave this matter to her. Miss Shang stilled. There was a great difference between destruction and obtaining. But for all cultivators who cultivated ghostly methods, they would not think that someone would not want to obtain such a cultivation treasure and be willing to destroy it. Since this is the case, there should be no problem. Miss Shang nodded. Her gaze landed on the 2 servants next to her and Qian Mu. These 2 servants were dressed strangely. Their bodies were covered in heavy black robes, and even their faces were covered in black cloth that flowed with black flames. Her cultivation came from the method of the Qi dynasty, so she knew that these 2 servants were not living people. Your sect has a method to control corpses as servants and prevent their energies from dissipating? She could not help but ask. In her knowledge, even the legendary 12 shamans did not have such a heaven-defying method. Not completely. They need to be nourished by the energies of the 1,000 Grave Mountain. Qian Mu looked at her and explained without concealing anything. It was like using life-bond energies to maintain these corpses? Miss Shang stilled. Because in the end, the life-bond item's energies would be used up and eaten by these corpses like food. The 1,000 Grave Mountain is the life-bond item my master left me. If I can turn it into a stronger method to help my master take revenge, this is worth it. Qian Mu could see her confusion and said, even if master's life-bond item is not here, I still remember the method he taught me. Even if I cannot reach Realm 8, as long as it is passed down, someone will surpass me in the end. Young Mistress Shang understood what he meant. She thought for a moment, then raised her head and said slowly in her usual gentle voice, since Bai Shanshui is in charge of that matter, we don't have to interfere. Since you have such thoughts, then let's go to another place in the Qi dynasty. Chapter 7:14. Go where? Qian Mu looked in shock at Miss Shang. There are thousands of tombstones on Thousand Tombstones Mountain. Since you do not hesitate to use the energy of the tombstones your master left you to turn into a more effective weapon for revenge, the more corpses you raise, the stronger they will be. Even if these corpses only have abilities close to Realm 6 cultivators, they are dead, and do not fear death when facing enemies. Miss Shang stroked her energy sea and slowly adjusted the energy in her body. She did not answer directly, but asked in return. If the number of corpses you raise reaches a certain level, then you will not only be able to fight against some powerful cultivators, but have the power of a single cultivator against an enormous army. Think about it, in the Qi dynasty, where are the corpses of many grandmasters preserved? Qian Mu suddenly shook. His breathing paused slightly. Former Sage Hall? Eldest Miss Shang's voice was as gentle as usual, neither fast nor slow. Do you dare to dig it up with me? Qian Mu looked at her for a long time and could not help but say, You are not like the ghosts of the fish market. The former Sage Hall was not an ordinary hall, but an imperial tomb, the tomb of the founding emperor of the Qi dynasty. This hall worshipped the statues of the virtuous emperor and the people who had contributed to the founding of the dynasty. It recorded their deeds, and below this hall was their tomb. Those people who were called sages and saints in the history books of the Qi dynasty, no matter if they died on the battlefield, or died of old age in the process of ruling the country, or died of illness, were buried together with the great emperor using special methods. 36 sages, 72 saints, and those saints and sages of lower status, in the history books of the Qi dynasty, corresponded to the stars in the sky. The children of the common people had heard the stories of many of these people. Even in the homes of the sages and places where they had cultivated and studied, ancestral halls were built to commemorate them. Back in Yi Zhao's Thousand Dust Mountain formation, Ding Ning and he had thought about the possibility of controlling many corpses to form an army. That way, even if they encountered an army like Bai Qi's god-killing army, they could win. In the Thousand Dust Mountains, Qian Mu had controlled many corpses like this, but he was not ambitious enough. He had not connected this to a place like the former Sage Hall. This was not as simple as digging up an imperial tomb. How many cultivation places and families in the Qi dynasty were related to those sages and saints? What would the people of the Qi dynasty think? In the legends, the eldest miss of the Shang family lived in Chongling's fish market like a ghost hiding in a temple. She did not even dare to see the sun. But now, Qian Mu knew what kind of power was contained in her weak voice. Who doesn't want to have a place to settle down, where there are no conflicts and no worries? If they weren't forced into a desperate situation, who would do something desperate? Miss Shang looked at Qian Mu, her gentle voice filled with bitterness. The last daughter of the Shang family is alone and weak. Even if my entire family was executed, I did not dare to talk about revenge. I just lived the rest of my life in fish market. But Chongling cannot even tolerate fish market. My senior sect brother was pierced through my energy sea by a soul-setting nail, and my life was used to threaten the Bazin Kendo ground. Now, the Qi Emperor does not distinguish friend from foe, and has betrayed us. So what if I dig up his ancestral tomb? I am from the Qin, and have obtained some cultivation methods of the Qi. Even if I am cursed and chased by the Qi for eternity, I do not care. But you are Yen Ying's disciple. It is up to you if you want to go with me. Qian Mu calmed down in this gentle and bitter voice. My master even sacrificed his life for the Qi. But what did he do? He said softly and calmly, I think that if his ancestor knew of his actions today, if he could jump out of his coffin, he would slap him personally. Digging up the former Sage Hall to teach him a lesson will let the Qi people think. Why has Jing Xiu never liked Hu Hai, but favored Fu Su? Is it because Fu Su is really her and Wang Jingming's flesh and blood? Fu Su is her and Wang Jingming's flesh and blood. There is almost no such possibility. In my personal judgment, she does not like Hu Hai. One reason is that Hu Hai is stupid. When he was young, he heard about some people from the Bazin Kendo ground. He disliked those people from the Bazin Kendo ground and did not have any respect for them. Maybe he naively thought that by viciously cursing Yuanwu and her former opponents, he could win her love. But he did not understand her complex emotions. Another reason is that Hu Hai may not be what she needs. Maybe she only needs a son like Fu Su. An imperial son born because he is not what she needs will not be liked by her after birth. Also, Fu Su looks more like her. Many people think that he looks like Wang Jingming, and Hu Hai looks more like Yuanwu. So you mean that she actually likes Wang Jingming more, and Hu Hai came from a time she was not willing to sleep with him? No one can say for sure about the love and hate of people like her. As to sleeping with her, that is completely my guess. I feel that for powerful grandmasters, physical pleasure and mental pleasure cannot be compared. Whoever gets who, this is like conquest. People like them, in bed, each has their own needs. No one can say that they have conquered the other. But it is different when it comes to giving birth to children. In Chongling, a man with a thick bandage on his face was having a conversation with the doctor helping him remove the bandage that would appear disgraceful in Chongling. This man was Zhao Gao. He had originally worn the yellow robes of Jiaodong Commandery, and was the Jiaodong Commandery envoy closest to Jing Xiu. The doctor was Han Yuchen, a famous doctor of the former Han dynasty with the reputation of jade-face ghost hand. But time was the best butcher's knife. His hair was white at this time, especially after the Han dynasty was destroyed. In the first few years of being enslaved in the Qin dynasty, his vision had been damaged, and even some of his teeth had come loose due to the rough food. So his face appeared older than many people of the same age, and wrinkles had appeared at the corners of his eyes and forehead. Zhao Gao and Han Yuchen were talking in the depths of the medical clinic. The design of the cellar was almost the same as the cellar Shen Xian had imprisoned Hu Hai in, and was also Shen Xian's work. During the long period of time where he had disappeared from the world, Zhao Gao had been subjected to many bone-cutting and face-repairing techniques in this place where he never saw the light of day. At this moment, the thick bandages covering his face were removed layer by layer. Two identical faces appeared in this dark room. The same white hair, the same face, even the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes and forehead, and the missing teeth were the same. Zhao Gao's appearance, and even his figure, was the same as Han Yuchen's. Han Yuchen looked at Zhao Gao with emotion. It was as if he was looking at a mirror. Cutting and setting bones, especially changing one's height and grinding away some of the different edges and corners of the bones, was an unbearable pain for normal people. This kind of pain would accompany a person for the rest of their life. However, the man in front of him easily endured it. This was the greatest work of his life. Now, even the skin color is the same. I have taken care of the scars for you. When you are on the ground and walk under the sun for many days, the medicinal energy will naturally dissipate. Han Yuchen looked at Zhao Gao, and said emotionally and seriously, "If there is a flaw, it is your cultivation." Zhao Gao laughed. He nodded, and then a soft sound came from his energy sea. In the next moment, his body began to release primordial qi. This kind of release was very violent. It was not the usual quick use of vital energy, but completely dispersing one's cultivation. Han Yuchen's eyes were filled with shock. "You destroyed your own cultivation?" Zhao Gao pressed his lips together, and then recovered his calm. He smiled again. Since revenge does not require cultivation, then this only flaw does not need to exist. Han Yuchen took a deep breath, and said after a moment of silence, "This way, it will take a few more days to not expose the fact that you are a cultivator. Also, I have told you everything I know in these days. You should know how to use medicine to help you better." Zhao Gao nodded and bowed deeply to express his gratitude to the doctor. Han Yuchen's expression turned solemn. He bowed seriously in return, and then gently crushed the pill that had been stuck between his teeth. His face quickly turned black. Black blood flowed out of his nostrils. Then he died painlessly, and his body slowly turned into black water. In his and Zhao Gao's plan, there was a final flaw, and that was himself. From now on, he disappeared. Zhao Gao was him, and there was no more flaw. Time seemed to freeze in this dark room. Zhao Gao bowed for a long time and did not stand. Chapter 7:15. In the morning, Zhao Gao appeared in the courtyard of the medical shop. He flipped through some medicines that were being dried. In the past few months, he remembered all the characteristics of these medicines, including how to use them. Han Yuchen had taught him medicine, but he did not have any practical experience. He had to be especially careful and not make any mistakes. "Teacher." A student appeared not far behind him. After bowing, he said with difficulty, "The people from the Imperial Palace have come to invite teacher again. If you do not agree, I fear it will be difficult. Tell them that I need to prepare some medicines. In 5 days, I will enter the palace with them." Zhao Gao said slowly and softly, "Tell them not to be nervous. I have my own ideas." "Okay, I'll go tell them now." Hearing his answer, the student standing respectfully immediately let out a sigh of relief, and immediately turned around and hurried out. Zhao Gao reached out to touch the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. He knew that even this student who had been closest to Han Yuchen in the past did not feel anything unusual. Then in the future, no one would suspect his identity. In the morning, in the imperial palace of the Qi dynasty, the Qi emperor drank a bowl of bird's nest and a bowl of ginseng soup. Then he rubbed his eyes and stopped looking at the mountain of documents on the table. In this war, his identity was Zheng Xiu's ally. In reality, what the border army generals did not know was that a secret Qi army had been heading towards the Chu heartland in the past few days in order to cooperate with Zheng Xiu in killing the remnants of the Chu army at the Nanquan commanderies. If nothing went wrong, then the Nanquan commanderies would become an enormous battlefield like Yangshan commandery. Also, the killing there would be crueler than Yangshan commandery because the Chu army would not have a place to flee, and their corpses would be thrown there. In the past days, the Qin army had shown unusual determination and pursued the Chu army at all costs. This gave him great confidence. But as the latest military intelligence came, he had not expected that the problem would appear on the side of the Qin dynasty. Many of the pursuing Qin soldiers stopped in their tracks. Naturally, this was due to some generals disobeying orders out of sympathy for their subordinate. But as the news that Qi Siren and the others sent back reached the imperial palace, he could judge that some of it was because of Yuanwu. In reality, this matter was very simple. While most of the armies and cultivators of the Qin dynasty were under Zheng Xiu's control, these armies and cultivators were loyal to Yuanwu, but Yuanwu did not command them directly. So when Yuanwu expressed a different opinion, this battle would be completely taken over by Yuanwu. If the main force of the Qin army did not come, then the Qi army that he had spent a lot of effort to arrange would also lose its effect. Even more importantly, the person he had worked with before was Zheng Xiu. Now that Yuanwu and Zheng Xiu were not on the side, many of his connections with the Qin dynasty were cut off. When Ding Ning officially appeared in the Nanquan commanderies as the leader of the Bazin Kendo ground, there were more and more voices opposing him in the dynasty. Especially when there was a problem between Yuanwu and Zheng Xiu. Jiaodong commandery must have fallen into the hands of the Chu and Bazin Kendo ground. This kind of voice could not be suppressed. He had not slept for many days. But he was certain that after today, this kind of opposition would completely disappear. because today would be a grand ceremony that would forever be recorded in the history of the Qi dynasty. It was the day that the powerful methods of the 12 shamans would return to the Qi dynasty. He started to bathe and change his clothes. The true reason he had to come in person was not because he needed to appear in the history books, but because the power to protect the 12 shamans could not be scattered. All of the powerful cultivators in the palace protecting him would follow him to where the 12 beast gods were, and then wait for the young geniuses he had chosen to be absolutely loyal to him to come into contact with the 12 shamans and comprehend and cultivate the strongest methods on them. That would be the most heavily guarded place in the Qi dynasty. A group of cultivators would be born there that could change the world in the future. The passions and feelings inside would change a person's appearance. When he appeared in front of the waiting officials, he gave off unprecedented light. When the light in his eyes fell into the eyes of the officials, they were like flickering torches. The experts in the depths of the palace came out in full force, and then escorted him and the officials to the river. The river water was slightly red and the water roared. 3 enormous metal ships floated out of the water with a dark presence. These were 3 nether floats, one of the gifts Zheng Xiu had given him. Under the control of the Qi cultivators who had mastered the formations on them, the 3 nether floats moved quickly. In just half a day they passed through the endless green mountains. When the sun was strong at noon, the 3 nether floats entered a gate. The river behind the gate led straight to a mountain. There were cliffs on both sides of the river. To be more precise, there was a ring-shaped mountain that surrounded the mountain directly opposite the river. The river was a passageway that was forcibly opened up in the ring-shaped mountain outside. The mountain was not large, just 100 feet tall, but the trees on it were enormous. Some of the trees had grown for countless years, and gave people the feeling that they were as tall as the mountain. Most awe-inspiring was that the sunlight could not reach the mountain. The bright light rays were all blocked by a strange force outside the mountain. Just a few feet away from the mountain, these rejected bright light rays condensed into clusters of faintly discernible golden flame. The mountain that no light entered was pitch black. The outside of the mountain was covered in golden flames, but the inside of the mountain was like an eternal night. This kind of scene would only appear in some storybooks describing the dwellings of gods and demons. In the pitch-black mountain, there was a wide staircase facing the river that was as wide as the river. The staircase stopped halfway up the mountain, at the end of which was a very ancient temple. This was the ancestral hall of the Qi dynasty. It was also the ancestral hall of the Jin dynasty that had once ruled this part of the Qi dynasty. Because the cultivation place and the cultivation method were of the same origin, all the cultivators who cultivated the yin and ghost methods in this region came from the same ancestral master. There had been a time when only those cultivators who took in the spirit energy of the universe were considered orthodox. Cultivators who cultivated the yin and ghost methods were almost all killed, and thought of as the extreme evil path. However, there was a cultivator who cultivated the yin god ghost method that survived that era, and used his nearly invincible cultivation to render others helpless. In the end, people had no choice but to acknowledge the status of cultivators who cultivated the yin god ghost method. This ancestral hall and the 12 shamans came from that ancestral master. The 12 shamans were the most important 12 scriptures of the ancestral hall, and recorded the most important things. Only when the 12 shamans returned to the bodies of the 12 shamans would the powerful methods be complete. Chapter 7:16. The 12 sorcerer deities represented the 12 most powerful techniques of the Grandmaster in the past. He once had 12 disciples who respectively cultivated these 12 techniques to the extreme. However, it was because of a split among the 12 disciples that the heads of the 12 sorcerer deities were separated from their bodies and left to wander about in the outside world. The authenticity of the heads of the 12 shamans had been verified. After they were placed back on the bodies of the 12 shamans, the true meanings of the powerful moves that had been lost would appear on the surface of the bodies of the shamans. Yet the formation of the entire ancestral hall was one. The placement of the heads of the 12 shamans needed the formation to adjust accordingly. Otherwise, the stimulation of energy would cause the heads of the 12 shamans to crumble to dust and disappear from the world forever. The adjustment of the formation meant that some openings that could be infiltrated would temporarily appear in the ancestral hall. But this was not what the Qi Emperor was worried about the most. The passageway leading to the 12 shamans in the ancestral hall was filled with unusually thick yin energy. Only those Qi cultivators who cultivated methods related to the ancestral hall would not be harmed. If ordinary cultivators entered, their energies would be corroded. Even the powerful realm's 7 grandmasters would weaken their vital energy if they stayed inside for too long. They would also be unable to absorb the primal energies of the universe from the outside. Their methods would be no different from those of low-level cultivators. This time, the young cultivators he chose for the witch god's return ceremony all came from sects related to this ancestral hall. Even if it was just the methods of some disciples, at least they would not be damaged by the yin energy inside. If they were really harmed, then this meant that this young person did not qualify to cultivate the methods of the 12 shamans. He would not care about such injuries and death. What he was most worried about was that some grandmasters in the dynasty would not accept this arrangement and steal the methods of the 12 shamans. So up until now, he had only conducted this event in the name of the ancestral hall, and had not announced the news of the 12 shamans. He had to wait until the 12 shamans were placed back in place, and the formation of the ancestral hall was adjusted. The formation was as perfect as it was now, enough to stop those Qi grandmasters from entering the ancestral hall. Only then would he be at ease to announce to the world. Everything had been carefully calculated. There was only half a day left. Night was the best time for cultivators to cultivate yin energy. Whether it was in the Jin dynasty or the current Qi dynasty, important ceremonies were held at night. When night fell, the formation in the ancestral hall would be adjusted, and the 12 shamans would return to their positions. 2 nether floats would also arrive. The 2 nether floats carried the cultivators that the Qi dynasty had sent to the Chu capital. These experts were all loyal supporters of Emperor Qi. Their return would make the ceremony safer. There were many grandmasters among these cultivators. Their collective return was one of the important reasons why the Qi army could not stop the remnants of the Chu army. Waiting was torturous for anyone. However, as time passed, the golden flames outside the mountain began to sway, and the eternal night inside the mountain began to sway. The black energy flowing out of the ancestral hall began to form ever-changing totems in the air. Everyone present began to breathe erratically. The cultivators started to confirm that something in the ancestral hall was changing. Today's ceremony was not as simple as reminding everyone who cultivated yin energy that they were of the same origin. Many grandmasters of enough status sent people to the Qi Emperor. Their meaning contained a dangerous threat. While they did not know what the Qi Emperor wanted to do, regardless of what he wanted to do, he could not cause any damage to the ancestral hall. "I will not allow anyone to damage the ancestral hall," the Qi Emperor replied. The Qi Emperor replied and then maintained his silence, until the last ray of sunlight disappeared from the horizon, and the dancing golden flames outside the mountain suddenly turned black and fiercely rose up. It was as if the shadows of all the giant trees in the mountain had left the ground and were instead projected into the sky. He announced, "Only the 12 shamans have returned here." Countless cries of surprise and loud booms caused by the surging of vital energy struck the water. Many grandmasters could not control the vibrations of their vital energy. The leaked vital energy and the primal energies of the universe gathered and formed enormous demonic shadows in the sky that swayed. At the same time, the water in the river started to tremble and create waves. The two nether floats had arrived on time, passing through the river like moving mountains. The Chi Emperor raised his head to look at the swaying black demonic shadows in the sky, as though they were about to pierce through the heavens. With an indescribable joy and pride, he repeated, "The 12 shamans have returned today." His voice was not loud among the gasps and vibrations of energy, but when his voice sounded again, it was not just the two nether floats that came later that rumbled. Dozens of enormous figures charged out. The grandmasters who could not control their emotions before did not restrain themselves. They looked up at the sky and released their presence even more recklessly. The sky roared again. The gigantic black demonic shadow grew even larger, jumping and colliding endlessly. It was as if countless giant devils were roaring, as if they were unbridled revelry and venting. Seeing such an unbridled venting, the Chi Emperor pressed his lips together and did not speak. But inside, he was certain that what he did was correct. Unlike the cultivators of other dynasties, the cultivators of the Qi dynasty were always in a repressed state. Because in the past many years, even if the cultivators outside feared the cultivators of the Qi dynasty, they only feared the word eerie. All the cultivators of the Qi dynasty wanted to regain the glory of the past. For a grand ceremony, the resonance of countless grandmasters was the best movement. Hundreds of young Qi cultivators walked out of the cabins behind the Qi Emperor, and received the baptism of this movement. They finally understood what the harsh selection and competition had been for. Looking at the figure of the Emperor in front of them, who had different reputations, they trembled with excitement and bowed to pay their respects. It was also at this moment that a black wind blew out from the mountain ahead. The formation of the ancestral hall was completely adjusted at this moment. This black wind did not appear cold at all. The water on the river did not even form mist, much less frost. But when this black wind blew past the crowd, it immediately froze the blood of dozens of palace attendants and hundreds of guards. These palace attendants and guards turned into black ice sculptures, and were scattered among the other palace attendants and guards. These palace attendants and guards did not cultivate energy methods. The palace attendants and guards around them who had cultivated energy methods felt their blood flow faster than usual, and their hearts beat faster. Chapter 7:17. As the blood gushed to their heads in waves, the faces of these palace maids and guards were strangely bright red, but their sea of consciousness was exceptionally clear. The energy in their bodies seemed to be unprecedentedly vigorous. Looking at their companions who had frozen to death in the wind and turned into black ice sculptures, these palace attendants and guards even had a wondrous and terrifying feeling as though the vitality of those people had transferred to their bodies. Terror and awe were born from the same source. But to most of the nobles and cultivators present, the lives of these palace attendants and guards were like sacrifices. They just made the ceremony more solemn and grand. This kind of nether wind was a method the sect used to defend against the foreign races. In the past, the cultivators who cultivated the methods of ghosts and energy were persecuted more severely, and their methods of defense were crueler. At the tail end of the 100 or so young cultivators who were walking along the river surface towards the Black Mountain, there was a young cultivator who seemed rather unconventional. It wasn't just his clothes that were completely different from those young cultivators, appearing much more luxurious and bright. Most importantly, even though he didn't freeze up like those palace maids and guards, his complexion became frosty white, his body also starting to shiver. This young person was very famous recently. He was Su Qin. He had just arrived on a ship with the Qi cultivators who had returned from the Chu capital. Because of his special status in the Chu capital, even the people around the Qi emperor easily recognized him. "Holy One, why did you allow him to enter the ancestral hall?" A black-robed old man who had been standing respectfully in the Qi Emperor's shadow frowned and asked. This old man's beard was very long, reaching his waist. He was the previous sect master of the celestial capital sect, Hemiejing. After Yen Ying's death, he, like Qi Siren, was recognized as one of the strongest cultivators in the Qi dynasty. Also, because he had entered the palace to serve the Qi Emperor, he had given up the position of sect master of the celestial capital sect to protect the Qi Emperor. In the world of cultivators and in the court, he had extraordinary status. Among the hundreds of young cultivators, 5 of them came from the celestial capital sect. For a ceremony like this proportion was a great honor for a sect. But he still could not tolerate a Qin person, an outsider, entering the ancestral hall to study. The relationship between the Qi Emperor and Hemiejing was not very different from the relationship between Yuanwu and Xufu. So he had no need to conceal anything. He did not turn his head. His lips moved slightly as he said softly, "Some problems have occurred between Jing Xiu and Yuanwu. Their opinions are no longer the same. But Yuanwu cannot completely suppress Jing Xiu in the short term, or eliminate Jing Xiu. For a long time in the future, Su Qin will still be the true ruler of the Qin dynasty in the Chu, and may be the only channel between us and Jing Xiu. He is very important to us." After a pause, the Qi Emperor said coolly, "The reason I agreed to let him enter the ancestral hall is because he does not cultivate a Yin energy method related to it. Even with the help of some medicines and seal weapons, he cannot stay for long inside and learn anything." Hemiejing looked at Su Qin's trembling back, nodded and did not speak. In the eyes of a hunter, no matter how strong a beast was, it was just prey. But at this time, Emperor Qi and Hemiejing did not notice that the closer they got to the Black Mountain, the more obvious the mocking smile on Su Qin's lips became. At this moment, there was no more chilly wind blowing out. It was obvious that the formation had been completely adjusted. That strange defensive power had completely covered the entire mountain. Only right in front of them, there was an opening at the stairs leading up the mountain. The edges of the opening that could accommodate 2 or 3 people flashed with a strange light. It was like a blade was plated with a special kind of gold, and gave people the feeling that a crack like this had appeared in the void. This mountain protection formation would only be effective for a short period of time. It would only be possible for people to sneak in for a few dozen breaths when the 12 shamans were placed back in place. But Su Qin believed that this would not be a problem for Bai Shanshui. From a certain point of view, Bai Shanshui, who dared to sing and fight in Chongling and resist the Nether Float fleet when the Chu capital fell, was not just too arrogant, she was like a true madwoman at times. These Qi grandmasters, even if their cultivation was not much different from madmen like Bai Shanshui and Zhao Si, but in Su Qin's view, these grandmasters were not good enough to be on the stage. They were fundamentally different. This was because only people who were crazy enough could do crazy things. Invincible existences of any era were worthy of respect. Both the Yu Emperor of the former Yu dynasty, and this grandmaster whose Yin energy and ghost methods became mainstream in the cultivation world. Even for a schemer like Su Qin, when he stepped on the stone steps of the mountain, the disdain at the corners of his mouth disappeared and his eyes narrowed slightly. The stone steps were dry without any moisture, but the moss grew vigorously in the cracks of the stone steps. These moss and the trees that were as tall as the mountain were unable to see sunlight, but they absorbed another kind of energy from the mountain. Over time, they turned into a kind of inky black crystal. Many trees would turn to stone after being buried in the earth, and even turn into jade. But that was the process after death. All the trees, flowers, and even moss on this mountain were different. Even if they had turned into a kind of black crystal, they were still alive and growing. This was a great method to live from death. In Su Qin's view, Just looking at the vegetation on this mountain was enough to change many cultivators' views of the Yin energy and ghost method. In front of him, the young cultivators selected from the entire Qi dynasty were breathing heavier. Their bodies became lighter and more energetic. They even gave people a feeling of extreme fanaticism amidst their calmness and nervousness. But Su Qin sensed that the stone steps and the vegetation on the two sides started to give off a kind of hostility towards him. Some clear black lines appeared around him and approached the surface of his skin. Su Qin breathed slowly. His right hand that was not crippled gripped a stone seal in his sleeve. Under the infusion of his true essence, this stone talisman also emitted a cold and gloomy aura, which slowly spread around his body. The black threads that appeared around his body were like steel needles piercing into the gloomy aura that surrounded his body. They did not dissipate, but became exceptionally slow, and their advance was abnormally slow. Chapter 7:18. From a certain point of view, the reason he looked down on most of the Qi grandmasters outside was because he was a madman himself. The 12 shamans had been given to the Qi emperor by Zheng Xiu as one of the conditions. While Su Qin had the Qi emperor's permission to enter the ancestral hall, and was Zheng Xiu's envoy that the Qi emperor valued, this did not mean that the Qi emperor cared much about his life. The formations of the ancestral hall came from the hands of that ancestral master. Cultivators who did not cultivate Yin energy methods were definitely foreigners here. Any of the restrictions here only had cold killing intent towards foreigners. Also, the formations here had undergone the baptism of time. Even the guards could not predict what subtle changes had occurred inside. Su Qin could be easily killed by the formations here without any warning. However, this kind of potential threat was nothing to a lunatic. Su Qin walked at the back of the group. When he reached the end of the stone steps and reached the gates of the ancestral hall, the stone seal in his right hand had cracked. The power of the stone seal had been used up. His expression didn't change at all. His left hand released a few strands of true essence, wrapping around another similar stone talisman. He had 10 of these black stone seals on him. Before these stone seals were used up, he had to leave this place. The ancestral hall looked small in the river outside the mountain, but when Su Qin stood in front of it, his eyes unconsciously narrowed into slits. The ancestral hall, he saw from outside the mountain, was just the gates to the ancestral hall. The gates to the ancestral hall were halfway up the mountain. The half of the mountain was the ancestral hall. In front of the black gates, dozens of feet tall, especially when the black gates had turned into a deep demonic crystal after being soaked in Yin energy for a long time, any life would appear as insignificant as an ant. The Yin energy that was everywhere grew stronger at the gates of the ancestral hall. Those black threads that seemed to grow in the air around his body became even more active. Even though their progress towards his body was still slow to the point of almost stopping, outside of the dark and cold aura that wrapped around him, these black threads began to wildly and chaotically dance. The Yin Qi that was everywhere was like a great tonic to the 100 young geniuses that walked in front of him. The closer they got to the entrance of the ancestral hall, the smoother and faster the flow of the vital blood in their bodies became, and the higher their spirits became. It was even to the extent that their true essence had unknowingly become stronger. They wanted to see the inheritance of the 12 shamans as soon as possible, so they walked quickly. When the young cultivators at the front stepped into the ancestral hall, their fanaticism reached a peak. Their energies charged at their heads, and great roars sounded in their minds. Some people simply fainted, and some people began to fall into confusion, dancing and laughing. The orderly procession became chaotic, but no one paid attention to the people who had lost control. The young cultivators who were not overwhelmed by the fanaticism first sensed their vital energy inexplicably growing stronger, and in the next breath, the roars in their minds disappeared. This was a very natural process of survival of the fittest. Since so many people entered the ancestral hall to cultivate together, they were very clear about this. When he really passed through the door and stepped into the ancestral hall, Su Qin's footsteps became heavier. He was also affected strangely. The energy coming out of the stone seal in his hand was still protecting his presence so that he would not attract the killing intent of the ancestral hall's formation. But his vital energy was flowing twice as fast as outside. Just like what he knew before, his perception could not go more than 100 feet, and he could not communicate with the primal energies of the universe outside. He furrowed his brows and immediately sped up, overtaking many people in front of him. The ancestral hall was where that invincible cultivator received the worship of his disciples and passed down cultivation records. So the structure inside was not complicated. After the hall where the disciples came to worship, there was a straight passageway. The end of the passageway should be at the center of the mountain. There were almost 20 caves of various sizes. 12 of them were where the 12 shamans were, and where the ancestral master's most powerful library was. The other caves were the formation hubs of this mountain. Squarish, straight, and upright. This was the presence of a king, and very similar to the roads and layout of Chongling. But walking in this wide and flat passageway, Su Qin could not help but be shocked. There were all kinds of plants in the passageway. These plants grew from the cracks between the stone walls and the ground. They did not need sunlight at all. All they needed was the yin qi in the hall. Then, they grew extremely vigorous and thick. Among them, there were even black jade-like fruit. He carefully passed through and did not touch any of the plants here. In the process of approaching the 12 shamans, he used up 3 more stone seals. If reaching the 12 shamans required 5 stone seals, then he could only take a quick look at the 12 shamans before he had to leave immediately. However, reality proved that these ancient stone talismans were indeed effective. Nothing unexpected happened before he reached the 12 shamans' shrine. Now it was his time. Su Qin's expression became absolutely calm, and his footsteps slowed down. His left hand flowed with vital energy as he controlled the 6th stone seal. His right hand silently gripped something else. This was a piece of black crystal. The texture of the crystal was very similar to the giant trees that had grown for countless years outside, but it was more transparent. This crystal was only the size of an ordinary person's thumb, and was shaped like a hexagonal cylinder. Yet the surface of this crystal was covered in complex seal script. The seal scripts were very similar to the seal scripts on the side hall door of the 12 shamans. The fastest group of young cultivators from the Qi dynasty numbered about 20. At this time, they had entered the 12 shamans' temple. What shocked them even more and made them kneel before the statues? The yin energy accumulated within the statues was so dense that it was unimaginable. However, golden flames danced around the statues with extremely dense yin energy. These golden flames had terrifying temperature and were burning. Clearly, they were the condensation of the sun's true fire. These golden flames flowed around the complete sorcerer god statue. As they danced, they naturally formed ancient golden words and pictures, a place of extreme yin giving birth to extreme yang fire. This was a profound change that could not be described with words. It was an extreme transformation. Just this point alone was enough for these young cultivators of the Qi dynasty to be certain that if they obtained the orthodox method of this ancestral master, they would not fear the true fire of the Zhao sword furnace and would not be restrained. Just as these young cultivators were shocked by this scene, Su Qin's fingers started to heat up. The black crystal in his right hand began to heat up rapidly, and the crystal began to turn red. Chapter 719. This piece of black crystal went from slightly hot to completely red in the span of a breath. At this time, The young cultivators who had entered the halls of the 12 shamans, or had approached the halls with him but had not yet entered, had powerful energy vibrations on their bodies, so no one discovered his abnormality. Yet just like the turbulence when the 12 shamans returned, the piece of crystal in his right hand caused the formation deep in the ancestral hall to tremble. Or rather, some of the arrangements buried deep in the ancestral hall's formation core sensed the presence of this piece of crystal and started to wake up. Panting sounds could be heard coming from the depths of the mountain. In a formation core hall behind the 12 shamans, there was a black crystal disk dozens of feet wide at the center. Below the pure and transparent black crystal disk was an unfathomable cylindrical hole. Inside, one could see countless extremely complex crystal formations with the naked eye. Crystals of different shapes were either floating or grinding together like gears. Many profound black lines of light passed through these crystals and flowed endlessly. Above the black crystal disk, there were 7 old people sitting in positions that corresponded to the Big Dipper in the sky. In many legends of the Qi dynasty, the 7 stars of the Big Dipper were the stars of death. The true reason was that the star energy brought by the starlight of that star region could greatly affect the energy of Een and ghosts when it landed in the human world. These 7 old men, be it their black robes or the skin on their faces, had been dyed black by the Yuan Qi in the ancestral hall. They had stayed in the ancestral hall for nearly 100 years, and were the guardians of the ancestral hall that had been passed down for generations. The guardians of the hall had been strictly selected. What they cultivated was how to maintain and control the ancestral hall's formations. When they started to learn this knowledge, they would never leave the ancestral hall for the rest of their lives to ensure that the secrets of the ancestral hall's formations would not be spread outside. From a certain point of view, they were not just the guardians and maintainers of the ancestral hall, but also a kind of symbol of the spirit. When the core of the formation beneath them began to move, the 7 old men opened their eyes at the same time. They were shocked and even a little shocked as they searched for the source of the movement. In an instant, dozens of flames spread out from their bodies. These flames were all black, but they transformed into all kinds of different shapes. Some were like snakes, some were like flames, and some were like wandering ghosts. These black flames either began to follow the walls of the cavern into other caverns, or they began to penetrate deep into the bottom of the crystal disk, or into the depths of certain ruins. Their spiritual senses searched through many key formation hubs, but they still could not find the source of the problem. They were only certain that this was not a natural ripple like when the 12 shamans returned. How could this be? The old man in the lead cried out in disbelief. Deep below the crystal plate he was sitting on, among the many black crystals, there was a crystal that was carved in the shape of a baby. The black crystal baby stretched out a finger, occasionally releasing wisps of black energy to touch different crystals around it. This black crystal infant was one of the most important nodes of the ancestral hall's formation. But at this time, he saw a thread of golden energy flow out of the black crystal infant's fingertips. In the next moment, there was a boom as a tremendous force surged up from below. A faint golden energy surged up from the black crystal plate they were sitting on, lifting them all up. At the same time, countless golden threads swam through the formation seal scripts they were familiar with. Waves of the same enormous power were constantly activated, forming many invisible barriers. These invisible barriers that could be easily sensed with spiritual senses were originally the protective formations of these halls. But now, as they were activated, even their core hall was locked up, and even the 7 hall guards were trapped in this hall. Boom, boom, boom. Many heavy sounds came from the 12 shaman temples along the passageway. These were the sounds of many young cultivators colliding with these invisible barriers, and then being easily rebounded, smashing into the walls or the ground. The young cultivators who had already entered the 12 sorcerer god temples were isolated inside, while those who had yet to enter were completely blocked outside. The faces of the 7 palace guards turned ashen. They stretched out their hands to touch the crystal plates beneath them, or touch the invisible barriers with their hand. Their bodies were constantly trembling. They finally understood why the 12 shaman temples had been stolen from here in the past. It was not just because the Grand Master had died, and the disciples started to fight each other, but because there were problems between the builders of this ancestral hall. Among the disciples who built this formation for the Grand Master, there was someone who harbored evil intentions. When he was setting up this formation, he had already hidden a secret key that was superior to the control of the formation that they now possessed. But now, someone had activated the formation nodes they did not know about. The sounds of bones breaking, painful wails, and terrified screams filled the passageway after the heavy collisions. When some young cultivators encountered resistance, the vital essence in their bodies naturally reacted and fought back. However, the more power they sent out, the greater the backlash they received. Therefore, some of the young cultivators were directly turned into a bloody mess, lifeless. Blood splattered everywhere outside the 12 shaman god palace. In this great chaos, no one noticed that Su Qin was not obstructed by this invisible barrier. Amidst the muffled sounds of collisions and the flying waves of energy, he was like a fish swimming through a curtain of water, silently entering one of the 12 halls of shamans. The stone seal and formation eye pestle in his hand came from Jing Xiu. Back then, one of the splitters of the ancestral hall had done something when setting up the formation, and set up a secret formation eye that was above all the other formation nodes. But after stealing the 12 shaman temples, and cutting off this important inheritance, he was naturally hunted down by all the cultivators who cultivated yin and ghost energies. This splitter fled overseas, and Jiaodong Commandery spent countless years to finally get these things. Many things from Jiaodong Commandery had passed to Jing Xiu, but these were undoubtedly the most important. Naturally, Jing Xiu had a deeper motive for handing it over to him. The schemes she used were often to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and she had a series of follow-up moves. She used the 12 shaman temples to exchange for the Qi Emperor's alliance. Now, she wanted to have Su Qin record some of the methods back to the Qin after the 12 shaman temples returned. After all, only when the heads of the 12 shaman gods returned to the shaman gods would the complete technique be revealed. In order for Su Qin to record the cultivation method, she had already made other arrangements in advance. But the only thing she had not thought of was that all the knowledge she knew about the ancestral hall came from Jiaodong Commandery. But in one of the archives of the Chu dynasty, there were some records of this ancestral hall. The history of the Chu dynasty was longer than Jiaodong Commandery and the Qin dynasty. Chapter 720. Any library had complete defenses against water and fire. So even though the fire had swept through the entire Chu palace, most of the scrolls in the library had survived. Most of the scrolls did not record cultivation methods, but the experiences and knowledge of many cultivators. Few people would have the patience to read the vast sea of notes and travel notes, even the Chu imperial family who could enter the libraries at any time. But Su Qin was different. He was just a cultivator from White Goat Cave. For someone like him, any chance was a chance for him to advance in the world of cultivators. Good opportunities would only come to those who worked hard enough. The key was that you were lucky enough. And Su Qin happened to be one of the very few lucky people. In this library that was neglected, he found records about the 12 shamans. Jiaodong Commandery knew the secrets of this formation and the formation eye pestle, and the library of the Chu dynasty recorded some secrets about these methods. At the beginning of the Chu dynasty, the first group of cultivators came from the divided Jin dynasty. Some of these people had studied the methods of the 12 shamans in detail, and described some of the methods in detail. They even suggested that people who did not cultivate energy and ghosts could cultivate some of the method. So Su Qin's understanding of this ancestral hall and inheritance was greater than any cultivator in the world right now. In fact, just like Ding Ning, what he knew was actually strength, even if his cultivation was temporarily low. Especially after using many methods to confirm that the guardians of the ancestral hall had only taken over this place many years after the Great Change had ended, after the Qi dynasty had truly established itself. They had passed it down from generation to generation. They were certain that neither the Qi emperor nor the guardians knew of the loophole in the formation here, nor the existence of the formation pestle. Su Qin was even more certain that his true chance had come. Previously, he had followed Li Lingjun back to the Chu, entered Celestial Seal sect to cultivate because of Zheng Xiu's appreciation, and led the Nether Float fleet to attack the Chu capital, and became Zheng Xiu's envoy in the Chu. Almost all of these were passive, with Zheng Xiu's shadow standing behind him. However, this was the first time he had taken the initiative to control his own fate. According to Zheng Xiu's order, he had to check the 12 Sorcerer God shrines as soon as possible and find the Sorcerer God that was useful to her. From the techniques of the 12 strongest disciples of the Ancestral Master, she deduced that among the 12 Sorcerer God temples, there was one Sorcerer God whose cultivation method was related to star fire. He could use the cold star fire to resonate with Yin Qi. If she could comprehend this technique, she would definitely become even more powerful. According to her order, after Su Qin recorded the runes and diagrams of the Supreme Sorcerer, he had to try to modify some of the runes on the Supreme Sorcerer with the help of the array pestle. If he couldn't, he had to try to destroy some of the diagrams and runes. This was definitely because she was worried that someone would be able to discover the secrets of her starfire cultivation method from these runes and diagrams. This was because there were some powerful cultivators who could also use this technique to reverse engineer and probe the mysteries of the starfire origin Qi. The reason Su Qin had the ability to do this was because he had cultivated for a long time in Celestial Seal sect, and had made good achievement. He had a high level of knowledge of Seal script. Su Qin was even certain that he was arranged to go to Celestial Seal sect and take over the affairs of the Chu. From the start, it was related to Zheng Xiu's scheme. In his view, the mistress of Chongling was even more terrifying than the rumors. Her plans were deeper, and she would always have a backup plan. But at least, no one could win against the will of the heavens and luck. According to Zheng Xiu's calculations, Su Qin's time after entering the ancestral hall was extremely tight. He had to determine which of the 12 Sorcerer God temples she needed as soon as possible. Then, after trying to record the cultivation method on it, he would try to destroy or change the runes on it. Yet she had not expected that when Su Qin knew the methods of the 12 Sorcerer God temples before he came here, he had a large amount of time. It was a lot more than she had planned. This time belonged to the present Su Qin. The statue of the Sorcerer God that Zheng Xiu needed was ranked 7th among the 12 Sorcerer Gods. The method recorded on it was the Nether Fire Scripture. When the extinguished star fire and Yin energy merged, the new energy produced could not just erode the energy of other cultivators, but even more terrifying was that it could hide from the senses of other cultivators. Yet the first place Su Qin entered was not the 7th hall. He first entered the 9th hall. While he was the cultivator who knew the most about the 12 Sorcerer Gods, he had never seen the true appearances of the 12 Sorcerer Gods before they were sent here, much less the statue of the Sorcerer God. When he easily passed through the invisible power of the Palace Protection Formation and entered the 9th hall, when he looked up and saw the statue of the Sorcerer God, he could not help but be shocked. This was a completely green statue of the Sorcerer God. The statue of the Sorcerer God was more than 100 feet tall. It was completely green and translucent as though it was carved from a green gemstone. But what shocked him the most was not the rare material itself, but the flow of energy inside and outside the statue. Dark red mist flowed out of the 7 orifices of the sorcerer goddess statue. The mist was like a viscous blood mist. The body of the sorcerer goddess statue was like a real person's body. There were countless meridians, and the dark red mist flowed through those meridians. The sorcerer goddess statue was breathing like a real cultivator. Every time he breathed, Qi would be absorbed into his body. It felt as if the sorcerer god statue was cultivating on its own, and his cultivation was slowly increasing. When the crimson, viscous blood mist flowed around the sorcerer god statue, it suddenly scattered and turned into countless flowing light. Streaks of extremely thin red light flashed across the surface of the green sorcerer god statue, forming runes and diagrams. These runes and diagrams naturally glowed with 7 colors. Behind the sorcerer god statue, which was sitting with its head lowered and its hands caressing its sea of qi, these 7 colors condensed into the phantom of 1,000 arms. As Su Qin breathed, the air in the hall moved slightly. The shadow of the 1,000 arms moved slowly like they were alive. Su Qin took a deep breath. Then, he held his breath and narrowed his eyes into a thin line. His left hand grasped an extremely pure white crystal. The fingertips of his already crippled fingers actually continuously drew on the white crystal, leaving behind traces that only he could understand. Chapter 721. Because of the records and deductions in the Chu Palace, he was certain that the method of the 9th hall was what he needed. His cultivation experience in Celestial Seal Sect allowed him to record the method of this statue. But he did not have much time left. He did not try to figure out and understand the meaning of any seal script or picture. He did not consider if he could master this method in the future. He just used his fastest speed to record the method of the 9th hall onto the crystal in his hand. The flow of time was meaningless to a cultivator like him who had forgotten himself. When he finished carving the last seal script, he took a deep breath, opened his mouth and swallowed the white crystal. After finishing all this, he calmly calculated the time. In the next moment, he used his fastest speed to pass through multiple formation barriers and entered the last hall of the 12 shaman temples, the 12th hall. In the instant that he entered the 12 palaces, a certain array at the bottom of the witch god's statues and the array pestle he carried with him had a strange reaction. Following that, a hoarse sound came from the bottom of the gigantic witch god's statue, and the entire witch god's statue slowly moved to one side. In the records of the past, when that invincible patriarch died, his disciples fought each other, and a splinter in the ancestral hall took advantage of the chaos to steal the heads of the 12 shamans, forcing his way out of the ancestral hall's main gate to escape. However, it was precisely those records that concealed the truth. Back then, the splitter had only killed all the guardians in the ancestral hall and faked an escape route through the main entrance. In reality, his true escape route was beneath the 12 sorcerer god temples. Now that the hidden formation was activated, and the formation I pestle arrived here, the hidden passageway appeared again. Accompanied by a humid breeze, Bai Shanxue and Li Yunrui appeared in front of him. The water vapor blowing up from the bottom of the river was ordinary to the mortal world, but to the ancestral hall, it was an alien energy they had never encountered before. When the water vapor blew onto the shaman's statue and the surrounding walls, the color of the statue quickly dimmed. The surrounding black crystal walls even showed some cracks, and small pieces started to peel off. The hard crystal caused some damage to Su Qin's throat when he swallowed it, causing him some discomfort. He coughed lightly and looked at Bai Shanxue, who was sizing up the sorcerer god temple as if no one else was there, and said directly, "You have to give me some time. I want to go to the 7th palace." "Why?" Bai Shanxue looked at the sorcerer god statue with great interest. Her eyes were filled with admiration and amazement. She did not look at Su Qin. Instead, she said with a trace of disdain, "I've already given you what you want." This is not part of the deal. This concerns my life. Su Qin looked at Bai Shanshui. His expression did not change. He said coldly, "Zheng Xiu has such orders, so I must complete them. Otherwise, when I leave the ancestral hall, she will not guarantee my safe return to the Chu capital. If I'm going to die after I go out, then there's no point for me to help you. But if you insist that this is not part of the deal, then I can carve 2 copies of the method from the 7th palace. One for Zheng Xiu to save her life, and one for you. This way, even if she can use some of the contents of this method, with the Bazin Kendo ground's abilities, since it has obtained this method, it will have a way to counter it." The 12 Sorcerer God method describes the Yin energy method to the extreme. It would be a pity to destroy them all. Hearing Su Qin say this, Bai Shanshui smiled. "According to what you say, we will not lose out." Su Qin's eyebrows rose slightly. He did not hesitate to hand the formation eye pestle in front of Bai Shanshui. "At the same time," he said, "when I go out, I will destroy the 12 Sorcerer God statues." For Bai Shanshui, Su Qin was not a good person, but at most, he was a dangerous cub. Also, she knew that her and Li Yunrui's life and death had little to do with Su Qin right now. People like Su Qin cared more about how to climb up and how far they could climb in the future, and would not go overboard now. So she was not worried that Su Qin would play tricks. She smiled faintly and said, "Yes?" Su Qin looked deeply at Bai Shanshui and smiled inexplicably. At this time, Bai Shanshui was as rebellious as before, and even prouder in front of him. He knew that right now, he and Bai Shanshui were like a wild wolf and a phoenix. But the more a woman was like this, the more attractive she was in his eyes. Looking at the proud and beautiful Bai Shanshui when she smiled, he thought inside that one day, he would make a woman like this kneel in front of him. Only then would he be satisfied. Less than half of the young geniuses of the Qi dynasty had entered the 12 Sorcerer God Temple. These people had stopped at the first 3 halls. Even if they wanted to enter the Sorcerer God Temple, they were blocked by the formation and could not pass through. These young geniuses did not even know what was happening outside. They thought that this was the arrangement of the ancestral hall, and could only comprehend the Sorcerer God statue in front of them. Su Qin, Bai Shanshui, and Li Yunrui easily entered the 7th hall. In the empty 7th hall, the enormous Sorcerer God statue was completely silver gray. The cold star energy on their bodies dyed their bodies a strange fluorescent gray. On the surface of the Sorcerer God statue, the cold star energy and Yin energy merged strangely, forming energy crystals that looked like ice flowers. "It seems that you are more dangerous than I imagined." Bai Shanshui frowned and said to Su Qin, "These energy crystals that formed in the air, and then quickly disappeared did not seem to have any pattern, and did not form seal scripts that she was familiar with. There were no special diagrams on the Sorcerer God statue, but Su Qin clearly saw seal meanings from these ice flowers and quickly started to record on the same white crystal. "If you change your mind, it may not be too late to kill me now," Su Qin said. Bai Shanshui did not respond and frowned slightly. It was not that Su Qin's words made her uncomfortable, but that the Yin energy in the hall was so thick that she started to feel great pressure. With each breath, she had to use a lot of vital energy to resist the invasion of the Yin energy. "The Qi Emperor outside should have sensed something is wrong," Li Yunrui said softly. "I wonder what he is feeling right now." Although his voice was low, there was an indescribable joy in it. He was from the Chu, and had once been the Chu Emperor's most trusted death soldier. He was naturally the cultivator most loyal to the Chu. He naturally felt great hatred towards the Qi emperor who had betrayed the agreement and caused the Chu dynasty to break apart. Chapter 722. No one knew what the Emperor of Qi was feeling right now. It was deathly silent outside the ancestral hall. The Qi officials gathered here, as well as more than half of the powerful cultivators of the Qi dynasty, could all see that the formation of the ancestral hall was changing. The entire black crystal-like mountain was faintly emitting a dark green luster. Even in the dark night it was very clear. Moreover, all the cultivators could feel an indescribable vibration. This vibration made them feel as if the protective array was resisting something. What made people feel the clearest was that in the air outside the mountain of ancestors, there was a lot of energy surging outwards, like many black and gold thorns growing outwards. Something unexpected had clearly happened in the ancestral hall. However, the people outside could not know what was happening inside. Not even a sound could be heard from inside. The Emperor of Qi pressed his lips together. He still stood calmly, but his face uncontrollably paled. The 12 shamans were not just the hope of the Qi dynasty's revival, they were what he relied on to win the hearts of the people, and the fervent support of the people of the Qi dynasty. For the 12 shamans, he did not just betray Yan Ing, who was respected by all of the Qi cultivation world, but also betrayed an ally like Yan Qi. He did not dare to think what price he would have to pay if this matter did not succeed. I fear we have all overlooked something. He Miejing's deep and cold voice sounded next to him. We have all overlooked the 5 temple guards. The Emperor of Qi and the officials around him stopped breathing. The 5 temple guards should be the Qi cultivators most loyal to the ancestral hall. They had dedicated their lives to this formation. Yet, because of the pure Yin energy of the ancestral hall, one day of cultivation in the ancestral hall was equivalent to more than a dozen days of cultivation outside. Their cultivation speed was more than 10 times faster than ordinary cultivators. So each generation of temple guards had 10 times more cultivation time than ordinary cultivators. Even those with mediocre talent could enter Realm 7. These 5 temple guards had entered Realm 7 at different times. The earliest had entered Realm 7 decades ago, and the latest had entered more than a decade ago. Yet, these 5 temple guards were all Realm 7. Everyone who heard He Miejing's words knew what he meant. Because he was worried that the grandmasters of the Qi dynasty had thoughts of personal gain, the Qi emperor had chosen young geniuses who were absolutely loyal to the Qi dynasty to enter the ancestral hall. The highest cultivation was only Realm 6. If these young people had any strange movements, the 5 palace guards could easily stop them. The 5 guardians had given everything they had to the ancestral hall. However, that was under the premise that there was no peerless technique in the ancestral hall. Now that the 12 shamans had returned, who could guarantee that the 5 guardians wouldn't have any other thoughts? Most importantly, the formation of the ancestral hall could only be controlled by the 5 guardians. At this moment, it was cut off from the outside world and no information was leaked. In He Miejing's view, even if a cultivator like Yuan Wu came in person, he could not finish off the 5 palace guards in such a short time, and then change the formation to isolate the Qi people outside. There's enough food in this mountain. The palace guards can stay in there for 100 years. He Miejing said coldly, they monopolize the techniques on the 12 shamans. As long as they are willing, they can cultivate the techniques on the 12 shamans before coming out. No one responded to what he said. Everyone felt this was very possible. If the 5 palace guards cultivated the techniques of the 12 shamans and came into the world, then they would be stronger than the 12 disciples of the ancestral master. No one could predict what such people would do after they appeared in the world. He Miejing looked at the Qi emperor. Everyone was waiting for the Qi emperor's orders. If they attacked the mountain forcefully, the formation would be destroyed, and the 12 shamans would be completely destroyed. Then everything they had done before would be meaningless. Maybe it is just the movement of the formation itself. Emperor Qi took a deep breath and said slowly. However, he felt an inexplicable dizziness. Done. Su Qin's forehead was sweating slightly. Because he had used up large amounts of vital energy and mind, his face was unusually pale. He took a deep breath and handed the 2 white crystals in his hand to Bai Shanshui. "HM?" Bai Shanshui narrowed her eyes slightly and was slightly surprised. "The seal scripts on these are the methods of celestial seal sect. I do not have the time to explain to you. These 2 crystals are exactly the same. But since this is a transaction, to prevent you from worrying, I will give them to you. You can find a direct disciple of Celestial Seal Sect and see the truth." Su Qin looked at her and smiled arrogantly. He said, "In any case, Zhang Yi is a disciple of Celestial Seal Sect. You have a candidate and do not have to work hard. Also, since Bai Shanshui promised, I think she will not deceive me." Bai Shanshui casually put away the 2 white crystals and said, "In this way, you have some of the boldness of a great rebel." Su Qin's smile grew brighter and showed his white teeth. "This is just the beginning. In the future, when I am in the Chu capital, you will have use for me." Bai Shanshui looked deeply at Su Qin and said slowly, "I underestimated you. In the future, I fear that you will be much stronger than the marquises of the Qin dynasty." Su Qin bowed slightly to her. "Thank you for your praise. Are you ready after this matter?" Bai Shanshui asked, putting away her smile. Su Qin did not stand and said, "Of course, I am ready. I do not want to stay here for a moment longer." "Then I will send you out." Bai Shanshui smiled proudly. Without any pause, the true essence in her body began to surge. The array formation pestle in her hand became extremely red, as if it was burning. It began to blossom with flames like the tail of a phoenix. The energy in the hall sensed her presence. Black jade-like energy flooded in from the other halls towards her like countless demons. At the same time, with a boom, Su Qin activated the remaining 2 stone seals in his hand. A thick and sinister presence formed a ball of light that protected him. In the next moment there was a muffled boom. Bai Shanshui's explosive power collided violently with the yin qi in the hall. Coupled with the strong throbbing of the formation due to the formation pestle, a terrifying power kept exploding in the hall. With the hall as the center, the heads of the 12 shamans that had just been placed separated from their bodies. The flames on the shamans turned into countless swords that attacked the walls. Under the pressure of the wildly expanding energy, any passageway to the outside became the exit of a hurricane. With a pop, Su Qin vomited blood. His body was swept up by the wild energy. He charged out of the door of the hall and into the sky. In this moment, he was still able to maintain his clarity. Looking down, he saw the entire ancestral hall erupt like a volcano. The entire mountain seemed to jump up. The officials and cultivators of the Qi dynasty surrounded the mountain in shock like it was the end of the world. Black jade-like crystals and the severed limbs of the young cultivators sprayed out. In this moment, other than the few young cultivators flying around him who had not died, most of them were pieces of flesh and the remains of the shaman statues. Chapter 723. All the officials of the Qi dynasty, all the powerful cultivators present, looked up in shock and bewilderment. The black jade-like energy in the mountain surged into the sky, turning into black clouds thicker than ink. They cast a heavy shadow into their eyes, and turned their eyes completely black. At this moment, the sky of the Qi dynasty was black. All of these cultivators of the Qi dynasty, who had placed their hopes on the future, all of their bright future seemed to be covered by a dark night, an eternal nightmare. Those young cultivators who had been knocked unconscious or seriously injured by the invisible barrier in the 12 shamans when the formation changed could not withstand such a power, and were all torn to pieces. Of the 100 young geniuses, as far as the eye could see, they were floating in the air. Their bodies still had essence chi protecting them, so they should be able to survive. However, only 10 or 20% of them could survive. In this storm, the most eye-catching were the 5 enormous balls of light. The 5 huge black balls of light exuded a powerful aura that made many of the grandmasters present palpitate. A lot of yin qi was extracted from the black crystal-like fragments that had been ejected from the mountain and was directed toward the 5 huge balls of light. Why is it like this? The Qi Emperor's eyes were also black. He felt that his entire body was surrounded by darkness. He was constantly falling into the boundless darkness. He could sense that these 5 balls of light were the 5 palace guards. However, even if his mind was completely blank, he was certain that the 5 palace guards definitely did not have the time to look through all the techniques on the 12 shaman gods, much less use any method to destroy the 12 shaman gods. He had guessed many possibilities before, but had not expected this result. Plop, plop. When the wild energies turned into hurricanes in the sky, everything that was swept out, including the young cultivators who were too injured to control their bodies, fell into the water along with the rubble and the remains of the shaman god. Some of the shards, remains, and even limbs fell onto the nether floats, giving off despairing sounds. When the sound of hard objects hitting the nether floats pierced their eardrums, many of the Qi officials who had been standing dazedly as though their bodies had stopped moving gave off all kinds of sounds. In a flash, many people started to cry. Some people hit the ground with their heads, some cried heart-wrenchingly, and completely lost their composure. The Qi Emperor was surrounded by such sounds. This should have been a time of celebration, but it all turned into sorrow. He moved his lips as though he wanted to say something, but when he opened his mouth, he could not even breathe properly. He could not make any sound, and a mouthful of blood sprayed out of his mouth. He Miejing's teeth clattered. The aura on his body continued to expand, and the chilly wind began to howl, as if countless ghosts were howling violently. His face was slightly twisted. His eyes narrowed into slits as he looked towards the mountain where the ancestral hall was. At this time, only a Realm 7 Grandmaster like him could discover the abnormality. A jade-green water column that was clearly different from the black yin energy of the ancestral hall rushed out. At the same time, the sky responded, and a huge amount of water vapor gathered from all directions. In an instant, it condensed into a crystal-clear water droplet that fell from the sky. That glowing water droplet was very small, but it carried an indomitable and unstoppable aura. It instantly pierced through the berserk black energy. One sky water Yi Siling? He Miejing's eyes suddenly opened, and shot out tangible cold light. However, in the next moment, that sparkling and translucent water pillar collided with the dark green water pillar gushing out of the ancestral hall and exploded in all directions. The sound of water could not be heard, but there was a faint, graceful, and bold singing. Many of the Frozen Qi dynasty cultivators couldn't help but tremble. This was like an illusion, but the singing seemed to come from far away. It gathered a powerful water energy to attack the world, and was extremely real. Graceful and bold seemed to be complete opposites, but there was someone who perfectly fused them together. In this moment, He Miejing did not need to listen carefully. The image of a cultivator holding a sword and walking in Chongling appeared in his mind. That person was a woman, but she was bolder than most men in the world. By Shan Shui. He squeezed this person's name out of his teeth. Boom, boom, boom. In this moment, many powerful presences charged out of the 4 nether floats and charged into the water below. The turbulent bottom of the river seemed to have countless black dragons fighting, and was unimaginably chaotic. The Qi grandmasters on the 4 nether floats reacted. Their fury was not just because the 12 shamans of the ancestral hall had been destroyed, but also because of Bai Shanshui's disdain and provocation towards the cultivators of the Qi dynasty. Yet He Miejing did not move. On the other 2 nether floats from the Chu capital, there were multiple grandmasters who did not move. Especially when the evolved Jing masters heard the song, their faces were filled with bitter smiles. In the river outside the Chu capital, Bai Shanshui knew she could not do it. She knew she was not a match, but still resisted an attack from the nether float. She was expressing her attitude to the cultivators of the Qi dynasty. Under that attack, Bai Shanshui was wounded and fled. But they and the cultivators of the Qin dynasty still lost track of Bai Shanshui. Now, here, the song was wrapped in energy. When the energy dissipated and the sound waves came out, the person was long gone. Also, the energy in the ancestral hall was rampaging, and the water vapor filled the world. They could not accurately sense Bai Shanshui's escape path, so how could they stop her? To them, the faint singing voice was not only graceful and bold, but also carried a kind of pleasure and mockery. They thought of how they had ridden the nether floats to attack the Chu capital. She had seen but could not do anything. Now it was an eye for an eye. They had seen the ancestral hall destroyed but could not do anything. It was like Bai Shanshui had come back to collect debt. In the chaotic river water, there was the sound of heavy objects falling into the water. Then there were the sounds of the cultivators breaking through the air and the gasps of the nether floats. Cold and dazed, the Qi emperor looked towards the sound and saw officials jumping into the water. Shocked, disappointed, and even hopeless officials of the Qi dynasty jumped into the chaotic water to seek death. Many of them were not cultivators, and many of them were famed officials of the Qi dynasty. At this time, such a scene filled the Qi emperor's eyes. The sound of people falling into the water turned into a voice that smashed into his ears. This is not their fault. If they seek death, can you live? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.